At South Carolina State University in Orangeburg, this is video of some of that protest from earlier today. Students are pushing back against Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette, who is scheduled to serve as this year's commencement speaker.
And not too long ago, our Lieutenant Governor held a news conference talking about these protesters. News 19's Kiki Gushu joining us currently on campus speaking with demonstrators. So, Kiki, what are students saying about why they're protesting in the first place?
Erica, Christy, simply put, these SC State students do not want Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette as their 2026 commencement speaker. Now they're gathering out here on the plaza, as you can see behind me, and they're preparing. The student body president, Zaria, tells us at 5:45, President Alexander Conyers is going to address the students and their concerns. We'll be following that and give you more information coming up. Now take a listen.
Well, honestly, she just doesn't align with our values here at South Carolina State University. She speaks against DEI, which every HBCU, honestly, every school benefits from.
Student government leaders and seniors saying their concerns focus on whether the speaker reflects the values of the university community.
We are basically here to talk based on our morals at a university, a historically black institution, how we feel as students that we have worked so hard over the past 4 years to do what we have to do to be graduates, to be students that are willing to go out in the world and accept what we're given and fight for what we want. So we're not against the lieutenant governor at all as a person. We are more on the fact that commencement is sacred, and we want somebody here that's willing to uplift us as students.
Students say commencement should be about a moment that reflects their experience and their future. During a press conference Wednesday morning, Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette says she was invited months ago and plans to deliver a positive message.
The college called and asked if I would be their commencement speaker, and was happy to do that. I'm always happy to share a positive message on just what an amazing state we live in, what an amazing country we are in, and just that everybody's potential is unlimited. If you're willing to work hard for your dreams, they can come true.
She also called to end diversity, equity, and inclusion, but she also pushed back on criticism, pointing to what she calls a broader issue on college campuses.
We have to get rid of DEI on college campuses. We've got to get rid of indoctrination by professors on college campuses by ending tenure.
Students and alumni here say their goal is simple: to be heard by university leaders.
The purpose of today was to truly get Conyers to come address us how we deserve to be addressed. How we were addressed yesterday was not enough.
Forget political parties. The thing that matters most is the student body and the graduating class. They do not want her to speak, period. I don't understand what.
Now again, President Conyers is expected to take student questions submitted through the senior class president at 5:45. We'll be following that live and on WLTX Plus. Live in Orangeburg, Kiki Gushu, News 19, WLTX.
All righty, Kiki, thank you so much. Now, we have reached out to SC State for an interview. They say, quote, no statements yet. A board meeting is scheduled, though, to take place tomorrow morning. All of this happening at 9 a.m.
Yeah, we're also following some more breaking news updates.
Thank you, Kiki. Kiki, are you with me? Are you with me? Oh, yeah. Colonel Alexander Conyers. Colonel Alexander Conyers, the president of South Carolina State University. And first of all, good everything to everybody, especially you, Dr. Greg Carr. Hello to you.
I'm just fine. How you doing this morning?
I'm pretty awesome.
You are.
No, thank you. No, I'm awesome. Because Loree texted me when the court decision came down, and we're going to talk about it later. And she was like, I cannot believe I went to school thinking that this would happen and it would actually happen. I said, well, the good news is you were prepared for a time such as this. You were born for a time such as this. Your studies and all the work you've been doing in social justice has prepared you to now prepare us for a time such as this. This is why you prep, and you have been preparing your whole life as well. And I guess in some weird way, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We know what it is.
Yes.
Now, of course, the law is trash. So
yes.
But that's a bitter pill to swallow for some people. But the first thing we have to do is stop believing in make believe. And I'm not talking to the vast majority of people. I'm talking to that tiny crew of us who were raised to believe that somehow we could manage this beast by getting on the inside and rising, that's an absurd concept. And I'm grateful to Sam Alito, a purebred racist, John Roberts, a purebred racist, all the billionaires who funded them, who we'll talk about in passing. I'm grateful to them because it's helping that little sliver of us who thought that was the strategy, because that's how we've been socialized to see. And it's affirming what the vast majority of us who have never been unclear about this see. And then this opens the beautiful opportunity to basically take a nice big fat wrecking ball to what's left of this thing and build something else. It's a beautiful thing. I'm not sad at all. Very enthusiastic.
I'm not very enthusiastic just because of the pain. People are still hurt, folk are getting through their emotions around. It's almost like a mourning for somebody that's thin sliver, they've lost something in their
the thin sliver always, but that is always the case with the bourgeois of any social order. The bourgeois always has something to lose because they think about themselves as representative of everybody else, and they think somehow that we think, because I'm part of it too, a petty bourgeois, that we have some form of outsized control over events, and that illusion is probably the one that causes the most pain. That's what causes the most pain for everybody. John Roberts and Sam Alito, the pain they're going to experience, the pain that has driven the fear that has driven their entire professional careers, the pain that they are going to experience will make the pain that we have experienced look like a minor pain by comparison. John Boy, it's coming, baby, and you can't stop it. So, I'm enthusiastic. I can't wait.
I don't think they think about it. I don't think they care. They don't look at themselves as racist. They are on a mission. They're almost like a heat-seeking virus, like people that just, they have one singular goal, and they're not thinking about people, humanity, their future, legacy. They're on mission. And so for them, the mission accomplished.
What's their mission though?
That I don't even think do you think they process what their mission is? Yes, on paper. I think they know the goal is total world domination by any means necessary. It's like, I don't think they think about what is the impact what impact am I really having on humanity? How will I really be remembered? They're in their cabal. It's like a lot of us sometimes we stay in our little navel gazing circles that reinforce the things that we believe. And, until you lift your head up and look around and have a broader view, they're not seeing any of this. The fact that lady, the lieutenant governor, could open her mouth to talk about ending DEI on campuses, and she was going to go to South Carolina State University, a Black land granted, the first, university in the state of South Carolina, the only land grant, public school devoted to educating Black people because of the racism of South Carolina. The fact that she could talk about DEI with her full chest tells me either she's really stupid, really, really, really like there's like genetically something's wrong with her, or she's, I don't know. I'm like, what does she think she was gonna come there and she's like, I can't believe they don't want me here. That's so weird.
You think? What it's certainly weird by any independent measure, but ideologically, she's trying to win a race.
So you come to a Black school and disparage the very children that you like.
That's good politics. Who's gonna check her, boo? In other words, if every eligible voter in the state of South Carolina were energized to turn out and vote, she wouldn't be talking like that. But the simple fact of the matter is that there are two, at least as far as I can see, there are two factors we have to take in mind when we hear something like that. One is we don't vote our numbers in South Carolina, so she's speaking with impunity. And the other factor is she's trying to win a Republican primary to take the language from the 19th century that these Europeans trying to take us back to, in the words of the racist element of the populist movement back in the late 19th century, this election will be won by the person that yells the N-word the loudest. So she's appealing to fire up her base. Right now, she's trailing in most polls, either to Wilson or to that insufferable Nancy Mace. And so she's within the margin of error. Nobody has any of them up by more than 6 points. And in a couple of points, in a couple of polls, Yvette is up by 1 point. So in order for her to secure her base, especially if American Negroes, yes, I'm talking to every one of you Negroes in the state of South Carolina, are not going to come out to vote, that's good politics. Let me go to the heart of the Negro aspiration and eviscerate them to their face and count on them to say, and not vote, because the people who are going to come out will see me as a hero. I went into the enemy's tent and turned their stuff over. You need to vote for me, not them. Wilson didn't do it. Mace didn't do it. I had the guts to go to their face. And notice what she said. We'll concentrate on the woke mob and all that. She said, get rid of tenure. See, South Carolina is a quote unquote, as we know, right to work state. They're going after organized labor. South Carolina is the place you go. Bring your factory here. Why? We don't pay living wages. We don't worry about no 8-hour work day. Overtime, what the hell is that? And then the enemies of these people are intelligent people. So she's speaking at South Carolina State, but as we know, Orangeburg, where South Carolina State is, and through that little hole in the fence, Claflin, where Kathy and Adams and the rest of them at, who those students and faculty supported South Carolina State this week, shout out to both those campuses. That Orangeburg is less than an hour from Columbia, from the state capital. And what university is there? Well, that's the one where Don Staley coaches, the University of South Carolina. Getting rid of tenure don't just apply to South Carolina State. It also applies to the Gamecocks. You Negroes run up down there and throw that ball in a hoop, and you faculty members need to be the hell out of here. We're here for our entertainment purposes only. We don't need no tenure. That was really what that's the larger political question. So, I mean, I love her. Go, Yvette. Go, baby. Go. I love it.
Let me say, first of all, thank you for starting today's class. 3, 2, 1, go. 3, 2, 1, blast off. Starting with the children, with the young people. I think we thank them. No, we thank them. Listen, I've been talking about them all week because this is the way for. Some people think they're the ones, and no, it's always been the young people. It's always been the college kid. We didn't get the Black Panther Party. We didn't get any, Martin Luther King was what, 20, 22, 23 when he was to come out and do this? How young was Thurgood Marshall when he was fighting all of these battles legally? The young people are the ones that, because they have everything to lose. This is their, and because they're on campuses, the notion that they were indoctrinated by professors. As a former student, Dr. Carr, as a former student, as a person that teaches young people, you ain't pushing them, you're guiding them. They're coming with some very strong ideas that you need to activate their critical thinking. Once that critical thinking gene is activated, man, you are in battles in classrooms with these young people because they have very clear thoughts. This is their country to inherit. How dare you? How dare you insinuate that some professors is, putting, addling their minds and making them believe this. Who addled your mind, ma'am? Who addled your mind?
Teachers.
Okay. It wasn't teachers. I think her church addled her mind, but I guess maybe her family history. But Colonel Alexander Conyers had one job. What was he thinking? You have intimate relations with, college presidents, as I have over time, both good and bad. What was he thinking in doing this? And I'm grateful that he did it because it woke them young people like, oh, I bet you will not ruin my commencement.
That's right.
What was he thinking?
Well, I mean, Brother Conyers comes out of military, as we know. He's not an academic.
While you're thinking about it, college presidents generally are not academics. They are fundraisers. Their job is to raise money. You can be both, but by and large, their primary job is to raise money. So I'm sure he was, you know, reached out to get a check, maybe?
I think there has always been a range of backgrounds. Absolutely. The function of the president of a university, which is why, as we know, you have a provost or a vice president for academic affairs to handle the academic side, which is the only reason the university exists, at least theoretically, is the academic pursuit. As Jewel Terrell used to tell our first year students, a university is the students and the faculty. Everybody else is here to support that enterprise. So a president's job is to raise money in the contemporary era, even as we see the president of Bard College is leaving after 50 years. That's the only job he ever had, really, in terms of a job, because of this Epstein business. And of course, everybody looking funny at Epstein now, but he's like, yeah, we are all chasing the dollar, and he kept Bard College open. You know what I'm saying? He took that job in his 20s, and now late 20s, and now they forced him out. He's like, yeah, I'll do what's best for the university, but never forget, Jeffrey Epstein money is as clean and as dirty as everybody else's money y'all begging for. So let's be clear, but he's out. So yeah, there is that function, but there's also a range. Fred Humphreys, the longtime president of Florida A&M, was a chemist by training, a scientist by training, an intellectual of the first order, and he also raised a ton of money, and he know how to do it at Tennessee State. Benjamin Elijah Mage from a previous generation, very adept. He had correspondence. There's a whole book on the correspondence between he and Martha Mitchell, who wrote Gone with the Wind, and she set up scholarships using money. Buck Benny, who kept Martin Luther King safe and a bunch of other 16, 17-year-old boys from going into World War II, was a top-ranked academic, but he was also had the ability to raise money. I mean, fast forward to today, Janetta Cole at Spelman. She know how to bring money in, but she was also a top-ranked social scientist. I mean, so there's and then on the other end,
let me apologize, because I do think there has been a current iteration of college presidents that have been single-minded in the pursuit of money.
I agree.
And I think this college president has demonstrated what that looks like when you don't consider the young people that you are.
I think a lot of them do that. And I think a lot of them do that even with the best intentions, because, well, let's just think about this. And we can use two very recent examples, South Carolina State being one, Hampton being another. And was it San Diego State? I don't want to name the school without being absolutely certain, but there is a trend now of there are more ex-military. So this isn't unusual. You're raising something that's very important. They're bringing in ex-military, and it's not San Diego State. I can't think of the school, but anyway.
Yeah, no, Brad Golding.
I don't know. Is he ex-military?
Hold on. Yeah, past. No. Go ahead.
He's not. That's San Diego State. But the whole idea being that you can bring in people, because as you say, if a president's job is to cultivate relationships that lead to donations, that lead to business partnerships, then the idea is that you want someone who can do that, who has experience. Now, it's very interesting, though, because you got ex-politicians. Who was the guy that had got the cancer diagnosis and left the presidency of the University of Florida? Ben Sass, Senator Sass from Nebraska. He was the president of the University of Florida, so these political contacts, and he's part of the White Nationalist Party, so they were comfortable with that. And Sass, kind of a political iteration in some ways of a John Roberts, although he's from a previous generation. Roberts is the idea that it's sensible conservatism, whatever it is, bullshit. But so you got politicians, ex-politicians. Purdue, what's his name? Who was the budget manager? Well, he may have been OMB. Mitch Daniels, president of Purdue University. You got ex-politicians, then you've got business people who they slot in, try to do this. And there's this tension because the students who increasingly are being cultivated, to borrow the language from this hopefully failed gubernatorial candidate, who are being indoctrinated in some ways to think about college as basically an employment skills development experience, which is not what it has ever been conceptually, but which too many of us parrot as if that's the purpose of college. Unfortunately, they look to people like that as who is going to, in the words of young people in the generation now who are in college, secure the bag.
Just one correction. producing the president is Meng Chiang, who is
Yes. Was the president.
he comes out of the business world, startup funding, you know, that hedge fund, I guess, the tech world.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the Boilermakers are continuing to pursue that general attitude. Yeah, I forget how long Daniels was there. I know he's not the president anymore, but he was. And at the time, it was a little controversial because remember, I want to say Mitch Daniels was the governor of Indiana. Can you say something before that? Because, you know, all this austerity. And he might have been the governor when the strict voter ID stuff started.
49th governor of Indiana, Republican.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you get, but he's a budget guy, right? So I mean, so okay, so this new person or newer person, yeah, this is they're reflecting the trends, but the hidden hand in all of this, the hidden hand, as we both know, having served for decades at universities, the hand in this is not the president, it's the trustees. So people think about the president. No, the president is a representative of the trustee. When you see a college president, what you're looking at is the objectives and the vision for the institution of the trustees. And that's why, you know, for example, at Howard, this litigation is still going through the courts. Howard University during COVID got rid of the elected student representative, the elected faculty representatives too, and the elected alumni representatives to the Howard University Board of Trustees. And they said they were doing it to promote transparency in a very Orwellian, very consistent. We got to get rid of these people who could come in this room and be like, no, we represent. And then they said, oh no, we'll still invite students, invite faculty, invite alumni to subcommittees on the board, but we have a fiduciary responsibility to govern this university. And some of the things we do, you know, we're trying to protect you all from legal liability. We don't want to extend that fiduciary responsibility to you. We're trying to shield you. It's the most paternalistic, the most maternalistic attitude in violation of the board's own bylaws, which is why they're in court right now. Shout out to Howard University Alumni United, Donald Temple, and the folks who are fighting in the courts in clear violation. But the attitude is, if you ask any one of them, they would say to their bones, oh no, this is for the best. This is the best. We know better. And it's like, okay, fine. They're not, Howard's not an outlier, because that's what they would say. They said, this is, well, you know the language. This is best practices. I love how all this corporate language is seeping into education. This is best practices. Other universities are doing it. And you see this over and over again. We both know it's the trustees. It's the trustees. And so you pick a president that reflects not the values of the students, not the values of the faculty. In other words, the reason there is a university in the first place, but the values of these people, many of whom haven't been on a college campus since they graduated, if they graduated, but who have a profile that speaks to what is valued in this society. Business owners or high-ranking business employees. I never forget an elder who I won't name, who was not quite an ancestor yet. He's advanced age, but he said, when you look at HBCU boards, after the early paternalistic age, the ones that were founded by white people primarily, stuffed with white trustees. So they keep picking these presidents, and then you have the rebellions of the 1920s, the rebellions of the 1950s and 60s, the rebellions of the 1970s and 80s, and you start seeing different trustees show up. But he said, after you move from that all-white board to the black boards, those initial trustees who were appointed to HBCUs who were black, many of them were institution builders. So if you go to North Carolina Central or North Carolina A&T and you see a board, a place like Central, for example, the guy who runs North Carolina Mutual is on the board. They built, he said, and then you start seeing this shift in the 80s and 90s from people who built stuff. The Earl Graveses at a place like Morgan State, or you start seeing the shifts to employees. I am the highest ranking black at this corporate. Now but their thinking is different. It's somebody who built some. These are people who are now saying, we need to get somebody here to get these two. What did you build? Oh, well, I'm actually the vice president for human development at Xerox. And so I'm very aware of what, and so with that board mentality, you're going to see a transformation in the president. And once you do that, I'm not sure, he looks more like, to the point you're raising, he looks more like the contemporary status of HBCUs than the previous iterations of HBCU leaders. And I'm not critiquing him. I think
I think the discussion is very important because I believe, and I suffer from the same malady. Like, I didn't know how the university was, how it was constructed and what its purpose was. I went there to get an education and get a degree, to get out, to go and live my life. But one of the things that I did in the classroom when I was teaching, I made sure that my students, I would do pop quizzes. Who's the president of the college? Yeah. And if you're in a school, you don't even know who the president is and what the role is. I think you should know that. Just like civically, you should know what a state legislature is doing, or city council. You should know that, your school board is important and why you should show up. You should know. You shouldn't just go to school and get a degree and think it's, you should be there investigating as well. Like, how are the lights on here and who's doing what? You should know how the company that you're working in, how it makes its money. It's something I also used to tell my students. Company, look at their earnings report. Look at, how they make their money, where most of their money is being made. Because if you're in a department that could go away, shouldn't you know that? Shouldn't you know that this is where they're going financially? And if you're not in one of those streams, then yeah, you could get laid off. You should know that, when you go into a workplace.
Yes, you should. But as you said, you didn't know. And I didn't know as a college student. And most people who don't go to college wouldn't know. And most people don't know. And most people to this day, unless they are fortunate enough to have a Professor Karen Hunter who asks them to answer those questions, they're not going to know. I doubt there is, I would say 5%, but I'd probably be generous. I would say probably at Howard, and it's certainly less than a tenth, maybe less than 5%. I don't know, without doing a poll, who could name one trustee. At least when they had a student, a graduate and an undergraduate trustee they voted for, they would know the names of at least two.
Right.
And I'm saying that that's also not unusual for faculty. Quite frankly, I was having a conversation with some faculty members this week, and as we're beginning to wrap up the semester, and they asked me, "Do you know anybody on the board?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know the names, and I know some of the people. I don't know nearly as many as I used to know, because those people have rotated out. But they couldn't name one trustee. So I don't know how many of your colleagues could have named trustees at Hunter. You know what I'm saying?"
Well, I'm not going to get into all of the details, but I think this is an important conversation because I think it also speaks to how we move in the world, period, kind of disconnected from the very levers of power that control all of the things. We don't even know who's pulling the strings. We don't even know who's pushing the buttons. We just get up every day, we go to work, put our head down, and we're living our life and we're free. But you don't even know who to protest. So I'm just so grateful these young people got an education these past couple of weeks that I think will carry them through the rest of their lives. And they won because that lady will not be speaking at their commencement. That lady will not be speaking at their commencement because they got up and they refused to allow for this to happen. And they refused to be allowed to be called thugs. And they got out there and they spoke up for themselves and they won. And I think that just that victory, that little victory, I think could propel so many. And I think it motivated a lot of other people, too, to not just sit idly by and let people run over you and do whatever. No, and it's not. You can respond and you must.
That's right. And I'm glad you say that, because that's where the hope is. And that's where our strategy must match, I would say, our morals and our ethics. And it was interesting, wasn't it, to hear the student body president there, young sister, to hear those brothers and sisters there, young people, 18 to 22, most of them, 22, 23-year-olds, early 20s to mid 20s, being graduated from Bulldog Nation there, or still going to be part of Bulldog Nation, being graduated from South Carolina State. Talk about moral and ethics and values. They don't have all the language, but they have more of the language and less of the apprehension. I won't call it fear, because we all have fear. Question is, how do you respond to that fear? Are you paralyzed by the fear? They were not paralyzed. And as I said, the students of South Carolina State, the students from Claflin, and let's be very clear, I'd be very surprised if it were the overwhelming majority of those schools. But it's clear that it was at least a plurality, and in the case of South Carolina State, it might very well have been a majority. And certainly they were held up, they were supported, they were surrounded by thousands who signed the change.org petition. A lot of us signed that petition. And those numbers were the pushback. If it had been 100 students or 50 students or 10 students protesting, it may not have taken off. The commencement speaker at Howard University was just named yesterday. The mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, who apparently will also be speaking at the University of the District of Columbia on the same day. And the sentiment that I have seen expressed in social media and in person has been very critical of that decision. And some, some who have been critical of it don't know a whole lot about the relationship of Mayor Bowser to Black Washingtonians. Those who have led criticism have talked about aiding and abetting gentrification, talked about being too aligned with over-policing of Black communities, which goes hand in hand with gentrification, and have been especially most consistently what I've seen, and this is just over the last 24 hours, because it just announced yesterday, very critical of what is perceived to be a compliance and a lack of will to formally and openly and overtly and consistently and strongly resist the white nationalists of the Trump administration, beginning in some ways with the taking up of the Black Lives Matter sign or signage on the street there on 16th Street here in Washington, D.C. And they have started a change.org petition. I've been to and through iterations of this. At Howard University, every time the students organize to voice their concerns, whether it be the Blackburn takeover in the wake of COVID, as COVID was still raging, they were talking about living conditions, whether it be previous student movements to take over the A building and protest the administration building, all those things as a faculty member who is only a professor because of the students. We were talking about that last night. I'll come back to that in a minute at Sankofa. My position was and will always remain in support of students. And right or wrong, their ability to express what they see, what they think to be the case, and then our responsibility as faculty, as we know, is to help them by continuing to add information, continue to push them to think critically, continue to help them develop, not to shape their minds, but to, as you say, feed them. And that, at least as far as I have been, as far as my experience has been, that is often seen as I won't go so far as to say betrayal, but I would say that it has been seen as being a little bit too ungovernable for the taste of some folk, whether it be administrators at the university or trustees at the university, for their tastes. In other words, like I said, there's a very maternalistic attitude towards students to say, well, they don't know, we know. And that is absolutely correct in terms of time and age and experience. And it's absolutely incorrect in terms of attitude and values. And so when you have people who say, well, we should all support the students, which shouldn't be controversial, that becomes a very dangerous thing in the mind of some people who said, yeah, we all support the students rhetorically, but we know better. And now we got to look at you too. Well, I'm saying, look at me with both your eyes, 10 toes, and your soul, and your mama's soul. And ask yourself, would your mother and father, would your community approve of you compromising what their values were because you think somehow that you can't do anything more? And I think there are too many folks who are timid in these spaces. Morehouse School of Medicine has a commencement speaker this cycle who graduated from the institution, a medical doctor who is a white nationalist politician in Georgia. And apparently there are a lot of alumni students who are not happy with that. Now, if you ask those trustees, if you ask the president, there's going to be the same response. I would be willing to bet everything that their response will be the same as the trustees of South Carolina State, the same as the trustees at Howard, the same as the trustees anywhere, who would say, these are the things we have to consider. We have to consider who's giving money. We have to consider the politics of the situation. Now, there will be some who will say, I support what they say. I think we are at least owed a public conversation. This is where we move from the social structure. What you're doing, you think is going to be to the benefit of the institution in a larger social context, to the governance formation. And I think what we saw at South Carolina State this week is people led by young people, centering young people, who had a governance conversation that spilled out into public view because they had no choice. And that speaks to the hope, because once we understand our strength lies in our governance formations, who we are to each other, we will go a long way toward being able to solve some of these apparently intractable problems we have. Spike Lee was in town last night. I didn't go. Dr. Wilkerson was over there, Courtney Wilkerson. She sent me a picture, she and Spike. A lot of people went over at the Lincoln Theater, which is across the alley, of course, from Ben's Chili Bowl. Congratulations, Mama Virginia Ali and the Ali family. They reopened Ben's Chili Bowl. A great upgrade they did, physical plant. So across the alley, there's the Lincoln Theater. Spike Lee was there for that. I saw some pictures. Washington Informer, some other press was there. A lot of press, apparently. I wish I could have gotten down to U Street for that. But I raise it because Mr. Lee, proud Morehouse graduate, family roots in Alabama and Georgia, and in addition to Brooklyn. Dr. Amin was saying that she grew up on the same block across the street from the Lees. So, he brought school days. He's been going on a kind of not low key, but kind of pop up in some ways tour. And he brought school days. So they watched school days last night at 7:00 at the Lincoln Theater. And I think about that in the context of what we're talking about right now, because if you will remember that film, and in fact, I was on my way to, I'll get it because it's easy to get. I'll be right back, y'all. Going this other room here to this case and pull this copy of a very interesting book. If y'all can get your hands on it, I think it's probably out of print, but it might not be. This is we ain't gonna talk about that this morning, but of course, since those young people there, and this is easy. Here is Spike Lee with Lisa Jones, the daughter of Amiri Baraka. Youngsters here. Here he is with the script, and they put together, every film Spike Lee made up until the recent iterations of films, they had a companion book. This is the book Uplift the Race, The Construction of School Days. And of course, there's Giancarlo Esposito and Lawrence Fishburne and the other cast members behind them in that last scene.
How old do you think Spike Lee is in that?
Sheldon Spike Lee, he's got to be probably in his 30s. This was 1988. Okay. I don't know, when was Spike Lee born? In fact, happy birthday, Jack Cole. Today is your birthday. I saw in the Nubia. Welcome. You came in the World Taurus Nation. Do you see it? What is he?
Yeah. 15? So 1988, he was 29. Like he started his film career right in college again, and animated with again young people.
Young people. That's right. That's exactly right. The preface in here was written. I'm sorry. The foreword was written by Ozzie Davis, of course. Here is Ellen Holly and Joe Seneca, and I raised that because we'll be talking about right now. You see them there. Remember, he's the president of the college, Joe Seneca, the brother here. And here's Spike Lee with his wife, and this whole also the politics of color. And remember, when the president of the college, Mission College, calls Dap, when Joe Seneca calls Lawrence Fishburne's character Dap into the president's office because they're engaged in an anti-apartheid protest, and they wanted to shut it down because the trustees got problems. And then the other brother who was in Soldier Story, I forget his name now. All these guys are working for Underscale. In fact, this is what he says in the caption here, just a mention of the actors. Spike Lee says, Ellen Holly and Joe Seneca, all the veteran actors, Holly, Seneca, Evans, Ossie Davis, were advised by their agents against working on school days because of the small amount of money. Thank God they didn't listen. Maybe this one time they saw that it wasn't about the money. And imagine that. Here we are, 98, 08, 18, 20, almost 40 years later. And this film is forever implanted in the movement and memory of African people in this country, primarily because of its value. And so, but remember when he calls him in, he got the other dude there who is from the trustees, and they like, man, this is bad for business. This is a problem. And so as they're talking about it, you know, Dap is just recalcitrant, not recalcitrant. He is 10 toes down. Well, no, we're going back to the protest. I don't care what y'all say. And remember, they had the conversation in the dorm room with Kadeem Hardison and Branford Marcellus. And they said, hey, man, my mom and them sent me here to get a degree. I ain't supposed, well, y'all coming to the protest? Oh, F y'all, forget y'all. And then the young brother says, maybe James Bond III, was he played? He said, do revolutionaries eat? And that's when they go to the Kentucky Fried Chicken knockoff and see Samuel L. Jackson and them, who represent the vast majority of our people who don't go to college, and they get into the class debate. It's actually a brilliant kind of juxtaposition of what's going on. Are you boys mission men? Is it, y'all think y'all better than us? Y'all niggas, and you go beating it. Now they protesting. He got one dude protesting apartheid. The trustees, president calls him in and say, man, yeah, shut this down. He said, forget y'all. We fighting for the people. And that's South Africa, global African vision. And then he trying to get his classmates, and they like, nah, man, I'm trying to graduate. That element is always there because you didn't come here not to graduate. And then they all get in the car because they all friends anyway while they're debating. They go to the place, and then the masses of African people like, F all y'all, because all you petty bourgeois Negroes. And they say, well, you look at you with them drip chemicals in your hair. Oh, wow. All of that is together. So I'm saying all that in the context of, we saw that in that little 3-minute report. You got black kids in suits. You got black kids in shorts, cut off shorts and t-shirts. They're the same young people. They're all in that bouillon base. And what a historically black college does is create a space where they can begin to explore their blooming early adulthood under the watchful guidance and in community with those who have been entrusted with the future of our community as it relates to that little sliver of our community who will go to college. Because every one of those young people represent a community, represent a family, represent so much more than just them. And, you know, the reason I wasn't there speaks to this conversation. Because at the exact same time, Haile Gerima showed again he and Shirikiana Gerima, their brilliant film After Winter on the life of Sterling Brown. And almost all of the film is Sterling Brown talking. Interview with Sterling Brown, different clips of him in different places. The great master teacher, as he calls himself, a major teacher and a minor poet. A master teacher, Sterling Brown. And afterward, there was a conversation he was scheduled to have with the good brother and my friend Lawrence P. Jackson, Larry Jackson, who's at Johns Hopkins, who worked at Howard for a while, and then Emory, and then came to Johns Hopkins. He's from Baltimore. He's the founding director of the Billie Holiday Center there, and wrote a magnificent book called The Indignant Generation. It's up there at the top of those books. So, a very interesting book. So Haile and Larry supposed to be in conversation after the film. So the place was packed, and I got there. You know, I'm grading papers. It's that time now. Grading papers, turn in grades. That's what we do for the next solid week. Beginning last week and now continuing. That's what I do. When you get off here, it's what I'm gonna be doing. But in the conversation, before it started, I got over there, you know, a few minutes early, and people were coming in and standing there at the counter. I'm talking with Jonathan and all the folks who run Sankofa, my man Chad, and of course the Lieutenant General Maritu. We all standing there talking. Who comes in the front door, all quiet, circumspect? My friend Imani Perry. So here come Imani. I say, Imani, what you doing here? And so she said, well, you can't see that film anywhere. It's not digitized. Highly, they're not giving up the rights. You know, it ain't gonna be found in no white university archive. You got to come to see After Winter, the Sterling Brown, the only documentary on Sterling Brown. You got to see that at Sankofa or wherever Highland want to take it, Highland Street want to take it. So, and Monty came down the East Coast. She had been in New York. I think they had done something at the Schomburg. She said, you know, Monty Perry, major thinker, cultural worker, writer, intellectual, first rank, right? She's at Harvard now, was at Princeton before. You see her recent book, Black and Blues. I mean, she wrote a book, a history on the history of the Black national anthem. I mean, so many different things. Vexy thing on Africana thinking as it relates to gender. A biography of Lorraine Hansberry. South to America, excellent, because she's Birmingham. You know, she's Alabama. And we talked about that yesterday, actually. So we sitting there and so I'm sitting there, I just want to watch the film, listen to the conversation, and leave and go keep grading papers. But Holly spotted me after they turned the lights up and said, Carr, you got to come over here. Y'all can go on Sankofa's website and see the whole conversation. I said, man, I just wanted to grade some papers. So, no, you got to come up here. Fine. So as I'm coming up there, I stop and whisper in Imani's ear. I say, you know, you can put you to work tonight. You got to come up there. So it ended up being Haile, Larry, Imani, me, and then toward the end, Carol Boyce Davies had come in from who teaches went to Howard undergrad. It was a Cornell for a number of years. Probably, if you know any of her books, her book on Claudia Jones, Left of Karl Marx, very important work. But does a lot of work, African global literature, particularly the Caribbean, but also, you know, global. And so it was ended up being the five of us in conversation. But I raise all that to say at a key moment, we were talking about institutions and the importance of Black institutions and how you make the choice to be in and out of those institutions. Larry, as I said, worked at Howard before he went to Emory, and now he's at Hopkins. You know, Carol went to Howard and then worked in all these different places, these Ivy League formations, then came back to Howard, where she's now back at Howard as a faculty member. Imani has never worked at an HBCU, but she has all these deep HBCU connections and ties, and she name-checked Tuskegee, which I was saying, yeah, my mom was born right down the street from Tuskegee in Opelika, right there in Russell County, and ran track as a little girl on Tuskegee track. It's the great ambition of my life at some point to teach a class at Tuskegee, maybe even to go there full time. Who knows what the future holds? But Haile made this point. He says, 43 years I was at Howard, and I was in battle a lot of times with people about office hours and committee meetings. He says, I spent my whole life is with students. I'm not filling out no paper to say you got to have 10 hours a week dealing with students. You know how many hours? I don't even count the hours. I'm with them all the time. They filmed this documentary. They are on all my films. And so he said, I'm not doing that. He said, I'm here because when I came to America and I joined a faculty, I was going to go to a Black institution. He said, you know what the thing is? He says, they could never pay me my value. Couldn't be done. He says, but the thing that I got from Howard, and this is by extension, is all historically Black institutions, including South Carolina State, including Claflin. Kathy tell you this, is it's the students. He said, it ain't even the faculty. And we all started laughing because he's absolutely right. Got some great colleagues and friends on the faculty, but let's be very clear. I'm there for the students. And he said, those brilliant students, he said, I clown my friends all the time. He said, I got a friend who's out on the West Coast, I won't name him, and he's like, oh, yeah, the HBCUs problem. He said, yeah, but every morning you get up and you walk to campus and you come on campus and you see a flood of white faces. He said, when I get up and walk, I see a flood of Black faces from all over the United States, all over the world. And that's why I'm there. How do you preserve that space? Even as I was saying last night, the university, as far as I'm concerned, Black, White, or Polka Dot is ending its relevance as a centering presence. And by that, I mean, what we're doing here, as we talk about jailbreaking, and not just talk about it, but do it, model what it would look like, is a very important thing to remember, that most of our people will never see the inside of a university. And so as a result, what we have to be mindful of is that the strength of the university isn't at the university, it's at the communities that send people there. Send the faculty, send the students, send the administrators, as far as I'm concerned. And our strength waxes and wanes with that connection and relationship. No doubt that these white supremacists will absolutely attempt to exact a price from Bulldog Nation and a price from Claflin You know, Howard University and University of District of Columbia, one private, one public, both in the same city, but they ain't cheek to jowl, separated by a fence with a hole in it, like South Carolina State and Claflin, also one public, one private, one HBCU complex in Orangeburg, South Carolina. So there have been phone calls, no doubt. The colonel has been getting phone calls from white supremacists. He's been getting other phone calls from black legislators in Columbia, and other people say, we support you. And then the whites say, what the hell are you doing, man? And whoever wins the governor's election, if it ain't somebody who's not in the white nationalist party in South Carolina, y'all can do something about that. You need to stand up. It's time to break the back of white supremacy. We're going to, as we turn toward the news of the week, centering the Louisiana versus Callais case, the reality is that if the white nationalists retain the state house, they've already got a gerrymandered supermajority in the legislature, then they're going to try to exact a price from South Carolina State from this, because they see that, as they should, as a humiliation, as an indignity. Yes, it was. Let's dance, whiteys. And by whiteys, I don't mean the color of their skin. I mean the political ideology of white supremacy, because there are many white people in South Carolina who would stand in their common humanity with others who are not white. And that is the hope of any society, to get beyond the question of race. But if you are going to be someone who embraces white supremacy, then you need to be neutralized in terms of your ability to lord your racist philosophy over the rest of us. And what happens to South Carolina State after graduation, after this election cycle, will be determined not by the people at the university, but by the people who surround the university, who support the university, or who attack the university. And so I would give credit, of course, where it is absolutely due, to the students of South Carolina State. And then, in the face of what must have been pressure that we will never know about, to those, the president and the trustees who had that meeting, or at least saying, okay, you can't come. Because I'm going to tell you right now, there are a lot of institutions where if all the students had protested, I don't know that they would have reversed that decision. But I know one thing, without that mass movement, she would be speaking. So you're not going to get the change you want by not saying anything. It's not going to be a change of heart or moral revelation or political awakening by an individual, a president, 2 trustees, 15. That ain't going to happen. Sometimes people are forced, as Lerone Bennett Jr. said of Abraham Lincoln in his book, some people are forced into glory. And whether the trustees of South Carolina State and the president of South Carolina was forced into glory or not, the reality is she ain't speaking. And that's a metaphor. Her whiteness, her standing in her whiteness to make her political campaign, and you better believe she'd have given an up from slavery, pull yourself up by bootstraps you don't have commencement speech. Believe me. But her standing in whiteness, that was the last whiteness standing. Her last stand didn't succeed. And so, this week, as we think about that, it's important to understand, this week's Supreme Court ruling, this Louisiana versus Callais case, it sharpens what we too often soften with abstraction. It's a little too abstract. In fact, it's very abstract for us as we think about these things, these values, question of race and class and gender. They're very abstract. Whiteness is a concept, but it's not a passive, accidental, or misunderstood, misinterpreted concept. It is an intentional, strategic mechanism for establishing and protecting an increasingly fragile, minority-centered power base, globally and within the United States. So whiteness is a concept that is used strategically, that is used as a blunt instrument to try to keep going this illusion that this small minority of human beings, most of whom who would call themselves white now, some of whom who wouldn't, shout out to Clarence Thomas, we'll get to you, sir, with your concurring opinion, your little page and a half, self-hatred in ink for decades at this point. 1991, you've been there wreaking havoc, haven't you, little man? But that's okay. Oh, it's fine. But all of this is to prop up an illusion, a lie, that a small minority of people can rule over everybody in the world and everybody in this landmass that we call the United States. Callais, this case out of Louisiana that has been wending its way through the courts, is not just a legal dispute over voting maps or a dispute over a political issue. And it isn't merely another instance of judicial ideology overriding clearly expressed legislative intent. Let me just make a summary here so that we don't have to do this later. The Callais case, the Supreme Court of the United States of America, led by a purebred racist, and we're going to talk about him. Trenton makes the world takes. Trenton made Sam Alito and then sent him to the world. Jersey boy. Mad about a Christopher Columbus statue. We'll get to that. It's a great book, Revenge for the 60s. That's what he's animated by. It's a case where Sam Alito, writing for the MAGA majority, 6-3, along with the consensual manservant Clarence Thomas, who would go even further than his friend Alito on this, as it relates to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The Louisiana versus Callais case, this majority inserts its opinion for the clear legislative intent of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as amended in 1982 to address the very question that these racists decide we don't care. Now remember, these are the people who say you should interpret the statutes based on what they say, the plain language. Originalists, they would call it, going back to the fleeing felons, Washington, Jefferson, all this crew, James Madison primarily, 1787 Constitution, all the way through to today. If this is what it says, this is what you shouldn't make up new law. But in this case, they absolutely inserted their opinion for that of the United States Congress. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 has been so narrowed. We'll talk about this in a minute. I'll go through the cases very quickly. So narrowed from its original intent. And here's the issue. The word is intent. So narrowed around the question of intent. So now you damn near got to say the N word while you're passing a law. Come back to that in a minute too. That is judge-made interpretations of the Voting Rights Act, not the language of the Voting Rights Act. So much so that in 1982, after a case called City of Mobile, the United States Congress comes together to renew the Voting Rights Act, which expires after terms of years, 25 years, I think, and then they have to renew it. They renewed it by unanimous vote in the Senate and an overwhelming majority in the House of Representatives, addressing the question of intent, removing the intent standard from the Voting Rights Act. In other words, well, the interpretation of an intent standard by the courts. They say, oh, y'all saying that you got to show intent to discriminate, and you got to, no, we're going to address that in the 1982 amendments. You don't have to show intent. So now these racists figure a workaround around that and come back around to the question of intent. And Alito, writing for the majority in this week's Louisiana versus Callais case, is like, you got to show intent. The legislators got to show racial intent. Otherwise, your challenge does not stand. And here's the insidious part of it. This is a two-pronged strategy. One is you got to show intent if you discriminate against Black voters or Latino voters or non-white voters. When we come to white voters, we are going to reinforce in law standing. Standing in legal term means you have the right to pursue a remedy in the court because you have been harmed. You have standing. What these white supremacists have done over the arc of the last 60 plus years, reinforcing what was going on for the centuries before the so-called law and freedom movement in the United States, or the so-called civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, what they have done is reinforce their notion of standing for whiteness. We have been harmed as white people. Now, they don't call it white. They call it colorblind. They call it race neutral. Those two phrases are phrases which mean white. So in Louisiana, after the Louisiana legislature looking across the Confederacy at their sister state, Alabama, where Kay Ivey has already called a legislative session to rewrite the rules. They're going to come after Shamari Figure's seat, maybe even Terry Sewell. 2 seats already in Alabama. But remember, there was an Alabama case last year that said y'all violated the Voting Rights Act. Black people got this percentage of people in Alabama. They should have this percentage of opportunity to elect. this percentage of elected representatives. But these white people never stop, and I love them for it. I really do. Because you have, this is the word to all the white nationalist haters who watch us. I am your open enemy, politically, morally, intellectually, but I embrace you in your political actions because it's going to take what you're doing to usher in the next big fight. And every fight you've had that's a big fight, you've lost. It's the Civil War, you lost that. You lost the Civil Rights Movement. You've lost every time you've lost. But as these young people in South Carolina State showed us this week, when we decide to fight, we win. We never lose when we decide to fight. The question is, are we going to decide to fight? That's why I'm very enthusiastic about this. I embrace you. I want the most corn-pone, hillbilly horde, ridiculous, bird-looking, shout out to Landry, the governor of Louisiana, silly-minded. Look at the potential governor of Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn, who now wants to get rid of the one seat that is controlled by Black people in Memphis and get rid of Steve Cohen, the congressman there. I embrace K.I.V., the chain-smoking, sounding governor of Alabama. I want all you hillbillies from Central Casting to come front and center. It's been too long since we had a Bull Connor. It's been too long since we had a George Wallace. It's been too long since we had an Orville Faubus in Arkansas, or the governor of Mississippi, Ross Barnett. Been too long since we had a good foil. And bozo, bo, as your face melts to match your brain. It's been too long since we had an open white supremacist that we could say, now we got an avatar that we can focus on. And in the interim, technology has so disrupted our capacity to focus that we need broadside clowns to focus us. Anytime you live in a society where people won't spend the time to read and think and consume in a way that help them reflect, but will watch a Lego video, it's better that we have real villains. So thank you. We need you all, because what you're going to realize is you're surrounded. And that Black people, out of our ways of knowing in our governance formations, attract to us all those other people who share our values to some degree or in full degree. And when you put all that together, you lose every time. This is the history of the world, and it's the history of the United States of America. So I encourage you to continue. It's going to make it that much easier. I didn't think I would live to see it. I thought it would take a little bit longer. Oh, but every day I get happier and happier because I see it's right here. We're going to dance, but it's going to be a short dance. So Callais is not just a legal dispute over voting maps. It's nor merely just another instance of judicial ideology overriding clearly expressed legislative intent. They literally, in this case, said, we don't care. In fact, they try to put words in the mouth of Congress. Alito, nobody could question his mind, but his soul, so warped and shaped by his experiences that he now sounds so incoherent. If you read this 97 pages of majority opinion, concurrence, and the dissent by Atlanta Kagan, the only thing that's going to make sense to you is the dissent. Because these racists are so far out of their mind that Alito, who has always been absurd, it's an absurdist reading. If you taught this case in a literature class, you're going to make a movie out of this. It would be like alternative realities. And Alito, listen, man, Sam, I love you, brother. I embrace you for this. Because this is the end of your sick delusion that you in charge. This is whiteness's last stand. Last standing for whiteness. And now we're going to come down to what these, and we're going to come down to the thing itself. It's their last stand. It's part of a last stand effort to preserve a political and legal foothold for whiteness itself at any cost. At any cost. They've thrown all caution to the wind. They've thrown away the idea that the thing has been decided. Stare decisis. The rule of law that would lead someone like Sandra Day O'Connor, who you remember, Justice O'Connor, who was no friend of the Negro completely, but who believed in stare decisis, who was once a legislator herself, to say, in response to questions about Samuel Alito's rogue ass going out, because remember, O'Connor retires from the Supreme Court to spend time with her husband, who had health challenges, and was Alzheimer's was his. He didn't live much longer. And before she made transition, she began to express regret about leaving the court because she didn't get a chance to spend that time with her husband that she thought she would spend once she had retired. And remember that circus clown George W. Bush tried to appoint his legal counsel, Harriet Miers, to that seat that Justice O'Connor gave up. And she was so thoroughly unqualified that she couldn't get confirmed. So she withdrew, and here comes Sam Bam Alito, Sammy the Bull. And they put him in. But O'Connor was like, man, this guy, and in fact, I'll read a passage from Revenge for the 60s. This is Peter Canellos's new book on Sam Alito. It's Revenge for the 60s, Sam Alito and the Triumph of Conservative Legal Movement. That one I'm pairing for a few minutes this morning. I'll come back to this with Lisa Graves' new book. Came out last year. That one came out like a couple of weeks ago. This is Lisa Graves' book, Without Precedent, How Chief Justice Roberts and His Accomplices Rewrote the Constitution and Dismantled Our Rights. She was the chief counsel for, what's the guy out of Vermont, Patrick Leahy. She worked on the Senate Judiciary Committee. So these two books right here tell you a lot of what you need to know about this. But this case, this Callais case, represents the latest moment in a multi-generational struggle by proponents of a white nationalist social structure to constrain the power of Black governance formations and movements. That's what this is about, in part, in principal part, because that's who you got to neutralize is the Black people first. Because if you can neutralize the Black people in your mind, you've got control. But here's the thing, you never neutralized us. Never. Reading Contraband Camp, Mike Harriet wrote a piece, and Latasha Brown wrote an excellent piece in Contraband Camp too about this. Everybody's been writing everywhere. Man, they called so many damn emergency meetings in the wake of this decision. I'm like, there were conference calls, there were Zoom, people sending me links. I ain't go to none of that stuff. Not because it's not important. I think the Urban League and the NAACP and everybody got a rally, and it's very important. Certainly Black Voters Matter. To support them 10 toes down. Cliff and Latasha, April, all of y'all, everybody, the state representatives, all that's very important. At the same time, I don't need that except to show my solidarity and support and help in any way I can. But I don't need to be reminded because I'm constantly thinking about it. And I'm going to talk about this in a second too. This is really the heart of what I want to talk about today. I don't need to be in a conversation that hasn't yet hit the heart. That's why I love how Black Voters Matter support this. The Black Voters Matters really approaches this question of voting the way I would approach it. This is why I love their work so much. And in conversations with them and places I've been with them, and I want to spend more time with them, especially now this election cycle, because they anchor the whole concept of participation in the political process in local politics that have national, state implications as well. They anchor it in self-determination. This is about Blackness. This isn't about building an American project. And no, all that will come or not. But the one thing we have control over is us. And who is we? Who is us? Those of us who will express our values and solidarity by acting on what we know and what we feel and what we believe and continue to learn and organize. And out of that foundation, attract others into that coalition. That's how you build coalition politics. That's the lesson of Fannie Hamer. That's the lesson of Septima Clark. That's the lesson in South Carolina of everyone across the board, going back to the so-called Reconstruction, all the way up through the battle against Jim and Jane Crow and apartheid. All that starts with Black self-determination. Let's continue. Like I said, this is a multi-generation struggle. And this just represents the latest iteration, the latest moment. And the question becomes, will we defer to a race-first rule of law, a white racist, colorblind, racially neutral, no intent, all lies? Will we defer to that under this rubric of rule of law? We've never done that. Or we leverage our movement and memory, unblocking our memory so we can remember the last times we faced these very these very indiscreet and overt challenges. How do we leverage that movement and memory to trust what our ways of knowing have repeatedly made clear? You heard that young lady, the soon by president of South Carolina State, she'll represent our values. Somebody says, well, you still got to give her, hold on, Chief. This ain't about her personally. I don't know that lady. But I know what she said out of her mouth. And I know what her politics are from what she said and what she's done. So you need to tell me something right now, Mr. President, Ms. President. You need to tell me something right now, Mr. Ms. Trustee. You need to tell me something right now. Are her values your values? Say it with your chest so we can be clear. Because what they are removing is any common ground when it comes to politics and ideology that supersedes their contempt for our common humanity. So is that your value? I want to hear it now, because if it is, maybe I make another choice as to where I want to go to school. If it is, maybe you are forced to make a choice to leave this place, because we have ancestors. Blood was spilled. Tears were shed. Oh my God. Who was I reading the other day? It might have been Lucille Clifton, the great poet. One of her poems called Libations, it exactly was. It was in Blessing the Boats. Sometimes I read poetry just to cleanse my mind. And as August Wilson said that poetry in his mind is the highest form of writing, of artistic writing, which is why his plays so often sound like poetry coming out the mouths of Black people. But it is the poetry of Black folk who just talking and he's listening and putting it in his place. But Lucille Clifton in her poem Libation talked about how libations are poured in many forms. And one of the forms are the tears of our ancestors that fell to the ground in our sacred places. And as that child said, as we watched her, South Carolina, this is sacred ground. This is sacred ground. In my more combative moments, I say, you know what? Let her come. And we're going to make her get that speech at the center of campus, at that monument to the victims of the Orangeburg massacre. And we'll surround her. We ain't going to have graduation in the gym or in the auditorium. We're going to have it outside. We're going to have a big ass circle with thousands of people. And we're going to stick her right there at the center of that monument with those Africans who lost their lives in the struggle. Now you say that shit right there in front of our ancestors. We're going to surround you. And if you say what you was going to say when you weren't standing in this circle, then we're very clear. You are the enemy of our common humanity. We invited you here so we could get them babies. Look at her. See, that's in my more combative moments. But I'm glad y'all got what y'all wanted when she's not there. See, because I don't like to, let's just get up in their face. You in the boxing ring. Why you think we watch boxing? Beat, they put them there. So at any rate, will we defer to this race first rule of law, or leverage our movement and memory to trust what our ways of knowing have repeatedly made clear? To me, that's the question. And the broader project of white minority rule, I'm talking about the global project, is straining to reassert itself against rising domestic here in the United States and global forces. Bozo has tripped the tripwire. So Israel, BB, the international killer, they drug the U.S. into the war. Yeah and no. The United States has been pressing all the time as an empire. It so happens in this moment you get a useful idiot like Trump to go along with BB, the international killer, BB Bozo, and the Bitcoin boys, right? Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner lining their pockets. You just so happen that these things kind of convene, but there's a world out there who is now accelerated, preparing for the post-US world, the multipolar world, as they call it. Reading the newest edition of Foreign Affairs magazine on this subject, and even looking at the fact that they just came back from another climate summit. France, for example, Macron saying that they're going to go completely petroleum free. Their goal is to do it by 2050. Phasing out, okay, yeah. And then other countries, and there's a bunch of countries who signed on to follow in the wake or to do that, who are on target. There are those who are falling behind. The United States wasn't at the meeting. Why? Because they don't need to be at the meeting. Y'all gonna pay for that hot ass gas. United Arab Emirates pulling out of OPEC this week. And also the news coming out that Israel helped them in being defended from Iran by extending their Iron Dome to help the UAE. The partnerships are reforming and breaking up. And we can talk a lot about other global formations, but this much is clear. This white minority rule, that age peaked. And now it's receding, regardless of the motives, whether it be Kim Jong-il in North Korea, or Xi Jinping in China, or Lula da Silva in Brazil, or Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, or what's going on in Cuba right now, or the attempt of Delcy Rodriguez and them to navigate the strait in Venezuela, not to mention Ghana or South Africa, which has seen such an increase in traffic of ships who are now going around South Africa. All of that is in a world where the United States has peaked in terms of its capacity to bully folk. Bozo is doing us all a favor in one way, as long as they keep them damn nuclear launch codes out of his addled finger reach. And that is revealing the weakness of whiteness, which has always been a weakness. Do you think that the world would look the way it looks now if they could have continued to assert control over what they perceive to be their colonies after World War II? No, it would not. It'd still be colonies in Africa. Now, I know there's neocolonialism. We're going to talk a lot about this over the next 10 weeks as we read Howard French's book, The Second Emancipation in Nubia. But the reality is that they've never been in control of the whole world. But the narrative that they are feeds our feeling that we can't do anything. So let's look at this stuff. I mean, the broader project of white minority rule, perceived white minority rule, is straining to reassert itself against this rising domestic here in the U.S. and global forces it can't control. In doing so, in getting so absurd now, it's exposing its own contradictions. And it's eroding the illusions that sustained it at its steadily collapsing peak. Those moments when you could get buy-in from us here in the United States, for example, Jack Roosevelt Robinson, we just passed Jackie Robinson Day in Major League Baseball. The idea that integration would mean some form of sustained equity for everyone in the society. Nobody black wanted to give up any black institution. Well, those who did were probably part of that little petty bourgeoisie who somehow have had planted in their heart, cultivated in their heart, talk about indoctrination to believe that white people are better. And I feel sorry for you if that's you. We're going to help you if you will allow yourself to be helped. As Tony Cave and Barr would ask, do you want to be well? But nobody was looking at integration, at least no critical mass of black people were looking at integration to mean the loss of our institutions. It meant moving into another type of formation with the social structure that would ensure our collective as human beings, protection, guarantees of security and safety, and ability to be fully human in the world. That wasn't the payoff. That was never the objective of white supremacy. And they fought against even that. That is the fear-driven stuff. And so now at this point, they're so desperate to maintain that illusion. And this Callais case is just the latest iteration of it, that they expose their own contradictions and erode the illusions that sustained white nationalism at its steadily collapsing peak. The rule of law ain't that strong, Sam. It's not that strong. Amy Coney Barrett is not that strong. Clarence Thomas is not that strong. Neil Gorsuch is not that strong. Brett Kavanaugh, and it's certainly not that strong. John Boy Roberts, with your little upside down smile, talking about bald strikes and the rule of law, talking about politically neutral, non-justiciable claims, all metaphors for white supremacy. We'll get there. So the task before us is twofold, seems to me. To name reality without euphemism, to call a thing. Don't be scared. If these 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24-year-olds in South Carolina State ain't scared, we shouldn't be scared either. And to organize, that's the first thing, to call a thing. And to organize, this is the second thing, and assert power with clarity, strength, and coalition, grounded in Black self-determination, Africana self-determination, which requires global solidarity. We'll get there as well. So I thought we would take a moment to remember about a month and a half ago, 6 weeks ago, it was on the 14th of March, that Saturday morning that we convened here. And I shared a few thoughts on the Fred Gray Symposium. Remember that? See, this is an important thing about the most important thing in many ways about our regular metronome convenings. Don't forget what we talked about the last time. We've been here now 321 weeks. Let's go back to 314. 322. Let's go to 314. The title that day was Common Humanity versus Exclusion. Do you remember? Yeah, I saw the Michael Jackson movie. Okay, entertaining. The songs, of course, now he's shot to the top of the charts. Mission accomplished. Y'all was going there looking for a plot. You was going in the theater for the wrong reason. But remember, do you remember? March 14th, 6 weeks ago, session 314. The title was Common Humanity versus Exclusion. Montgomery as method. Common humanity versus exclusion, Montgomery as method. The reason I bring it up is because the day before at the Fred Gray Symposium, we was on a panel and I offered this metaphor. It's this imperfect thought exercise because the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Dean of Law School, Dan Takaji, had mentioned in a panel earlier how Dr. King said, he feared he was integrating his people into a burning house. So that made me think about it. I thought about that for hours overnight. And it's okay, let me talk about this. I said, we're in the middle of a case. Think about that. And since we were talking about the Supreme Court case this week, think of this case, and I'm gonna keep going because if you want to see this talked about in more detail, just go back to 314. Do you remember? If you don't remember, go back and look. We got now 300 plus weekly sessions. And it is important to use that archive. If this were a book, you could go back and reread it in terms of a written book, but it is a book. It's in many ways superior to a book because it's mouth and ear in real time, and it's a tick-tock of what's going on week by week and a connection to a vast and expanding array of sources and resources that you can now consult for yourself, agree or disagree with interpretations, and then ultimately we come to a consensus, agreeing to agree. And it is small other spaces. My man Lloyd Kirkendall, thank you, brother. They came to Howard. Man, this is very nice. He stitched in this stuff, this Lloyd's thing, because he be on TikTok. He reads these books page for page on TikTok and goes through. So he got these young people now on TikTok. This is Lloyd's what's it called? Here it is. Black Cabinet Education. Since 2020, Black Cabinet Education University, got the Ankh on there, got the African American Museum on there. This is all stitched in. Got the Sankofa bird. Go ahead, Lloyd. So many of you all are in social media. I'm TikTok. That's beyond my bandwidth. I'm gonna stick with these books with no pictures in them. But Lloyd got the other one. He reading these books into the TikTok. So it is expand. We got this expansive space, and it's constantly radiating out. So go back and look at that conversation we had in 314, because the metaphor I used was, imagine we're in a courtroom and the case is this common humanity versus exclusion. Okay. So the jury is all of us. All human beings are in this jury box. Okay. The prosecutors are our best exemplars, meaning those who have stood for our common humanity. So the prosecutors are those who are saying there's a moral standard, there's an ethical standard, whether it be the student body president of South Carolina State saying these are our values, or whether it be Charles Hamilton Houston or Septimus Clark, whether it be you name it, our best exemplars, our best warriors. Okay. The jury is everybody. The prosecutors are our best exemplars. The defendant has already pled to the charges because they know if they go on trial with a jury of everybody, they're going to be found guilty of violating our common humanity. But they are the excluders. The defendants are they are the excluders. The exclusion is common humanity versus exclusion. These are the people who want to narrow our common humanity. These are the people like John Roberts and Sam Alito who want to narrow our common humanity. They got a definition of humanity that doesn't come from everybody, but it comes from a slice of everybody. This is John Broyich's new book. Professor Broyich has written a book called White Supremacy, A Short History, Cambridge University Press, just came out. This is where they are. You understand? They don't believe in our common humanity. And so they see the charges. The charges that they have is supporting white supremacy. Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, Eric Schmidt, Senator Schmidt in Missouri, who we played. Go back and look through the in-class archive where we started with that video of him saying, this country is ours. Everybody else just here. And if it's for everybody, it's for nobody. I'm not going to go through all that again. You can go back and look at 314 or look at that Russell Vogt, nasty piece of work, little bubblehead Brendan Carr, trying to get people off of television and off the bandwidth because they don't like, no, you don't want everybody. Yep, these little, and when you look at the common thread they share, most of them are religious zealots. They're not Christians. They claim Christianity, but they are not Christians. They are white nationalists. They're white nationalist religious zealots. And all Elon Musk, in fact, there's a new book on Musk that's very interesting by Quinn Slobodian and Ben Tarnoff. It's called Muskism, A Guide for the Perplexed. It's very interesting because what he talks about this, in fact, it says, I'll just read you from the overleaf. Everyone's got an Elon take. He's a messiah, a menace, a genius, a clown. The verdicts differ, but they share one theme. They treat him as an individual. This is important. This category of exclusion, yeah, they are individuals, but they all share a common root. You can't look at these people as individuals, as outliers, as somehow, anomalies. No, continuing, he says, Muskism argues otherwise. Elon Musk isn't a glitch in the system. He is the system. His worldview promises sovereignty through technology. Plug in, power up, and become self-reliant. But the more you connect, the more he owns you, because he owns the systems. If Fordism, this is Henry Ford, right? The whole notion of the factory and mass manufacturing, that's where the term Fordism came from. The idea of the industrialization of the world and the impact on workers, the impact on everyone of the industrial overlords and the system. If you read the cultural studies folk, Henry Giroux and all these people, they talk about Fordism. Well, these guys coined Muskism. So they says, if Fordism defined the capitalism of the 20th century, Muskism may define that of the 21st. Fordism helped build the welfare state. Musk undoes it. He thrives on dependence while preaching freedom. His cars run on subsidies. His satellites run the battlefield. His social networks train the AI that trains us. Talk about socialization. Muskism sells itself as the future, but entrenches age-old hierarchies. It offers autonomy for some and exclusion for others. It's pro-natalist, but anti-immigrant, futurist, but reactionary. It speaks of humanity, but warns against empathy. These two are interesting. Slobodian is professor of international history at Boston University. Tarnoff is a writer and technologist based in Massachusetts, written for the New York Times, New Yorker, New Republic, other thing. Muskism, very interesting. But Musk is part of that broad category of defendant we're calling exclusion. They don't want everybody, but they want everybody, but they want to exclude everybody from the tier that they see as the people paternalistic, maternalistic, running the world, mostly paternalistic, almost exclusively paternalistic. The sentencing phase, because they pled now, because they know that they can't win in an honest trial. So they're trying to avoid desperately the jury trial. So, wait. Y'all set a date? Mm-hmm. You pick the jury? Mm-hmm. Shit, we gonna get convicted. Hold on, we need to make a deal. And guess what? Seating the jury is only made possible by having everybody in the jury. The Louisiana versus Callais case is their last-ditch attempt, and I'm gonna turn to this and then we're gonna close for today. It's their latest attempt to restrict the jury pool. If you were a lawyer, you'd be going in trying to pick a jury, and you try to pick a jury favorable to you. Meanwhile, the people you fighting trying to pick a jury favorable to them, and they got what they call voir dire, where you ask people questions to get them off the jury or on the jury, depending on whether you think they'll vote for you or vote for the other side. And they got something called peremptory strikes, where you just get to get rid of a certain number of people regardless of cause. There's a case, Batson versus Kentucky. We won't get into that because they say you can't use your peremptory strikes to get rid of black people. But again, here's this nasty intent standard. But what they basically set up, the federal judiciary led by the Supreme Court, they've set up a system where if you don't have an X-ray going into the brains of racists that you can show everybody, then you can't convict them of racism because you can't prove intent. It goes across the board. I'm not gonna get too deep into that, but because of course there is no such X-ray. That's how you protect whiteness. You protect whiteness by saying, don't say the N-word, just enact a policy, and we'll say it impacts everybody, so therefore it's not racist, even though you can clearly show the pattern where it impacts us more. But that's a story for another day. So the jury, here's the problem. In this metaphor, the jury is everybody. So you weren't able to shrink the poll through voter suppression. You weren't able to shrink the jury through voter suppression. You weren't able to shrink the jury through gerrymandering. You weren't able to control the number of people who can participate. That's why participating in the political process is so important. Blood was shed, tears were shed in that libation to our common movement. And now they're trying to narrow and shrink the pool, and they've gotten so sloppy with it. When you read Alito's opinion in Louisiana versus Callais, this shit don't even make no damn sense. Why? Because I'm throwing all caution to the wind because I can count, and 6 beats 3. Footnote, we'll come back to this in a minute. The solution to 6B3 is to expand the number of judges on the Supreme Court, giving one to each of the circuit court districts at a minimum, and that would solve our problem. In order to do that, you got to have a Senate that would do it, and a House of Representatives that would do it, and a president that would sign for it. And because there ain't no number of Supreme Court justices identified in the federal Constitution. You could do it. You could absolutely do it, but you're going to have to get out there and get your ass in the game. You understand? But anyway, back to the point. So they weren't able to shrink the jury pool through voter suppression, not yet, through gerrymandering, not yet, not completely. And so now they see we all there. Wait, you know what? We got to make a deal. So here's the sentencing phase. Now the sentencing phase will be where we renegotiate the terms. Y'all going to lose. So here's what we're going to do. And I'll talk about that in a minute. In fact, one of these books, is it Without Precedent? Yeah, and I just talked to Steve Phillips people, and we talking with him probably next week. This is the brand new book, excellent book. Are white men smarter than everybody else, playing offense in the fight for racial justice in America? The good brother Steve Phillips, we both talked to him before. He makes all the search. This is his brand new book. It's excellent, by the way, because we're going to talk about solutions in a minute. But the presiding judge is the structural arrangement we have, the state. Meaning the federal government, state government, local government. If you want to get different judges on the Supreme Court now, because I'm telling you right now, these knuckleheads, Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas, even money, they're the next two to come off the court. And if you don't do what you need to do, if I don't do what I need to do, if we don't do what we need to do in the midterm elections, and that means taking the United States Senate. Forget thinking small. It's time to go big or go home, like them kids in South Carolina State. You take the Senate, you can block. And then they probably going to stay on the court, at least to 2028, where they think they can get some voter suppression through, which they won't be able to do. They can't pass that SAVE Act if you've got the majority in Senate. They ain't got an option of blowing up the filibuster. Do they? Boom, you white supremacists from the Dakotas. The point is this. You got to do that to stave off their attempt to move forward using that judge. The judge is the state. The judge is the state apparatus, the federal government, the state government, the local government. At the state level, is looking bad in the Confederacy because we don't get out and get involved and get registered and vote and get out there and combine that with protests and boycotts and all that stuff, which I think is coming. If history is past its prelude, I know it's coming. It's going to look different than it did in the 60s, but it will look like something they can't stop. But the judge is the formal social structure that we have. But even judges have to answer to the people. The state got to answer to the people. The jury is the most important thing. They're going to be judges, state actors who set aside jury verdicts because they don't agree. Because behind all of it is the illusion of the rule of law. But again, I don't want to get too deep into this metaphor. Y'all can go back to 314 and look at it. But the reason I'm raising is that when the defendant violates the terms of the plea requires our assent to say, yeah, we agree with the terms. But once you violate it, they breach that contract, and now you got to go to the trial. Alito and them clearly done breached any notion of our common humanity, and in their exclusionary rhetoric and their exclusionary legal opinions and their exclusionary politics, they're moving closer to a confrontation with the people. The question is, are you going to try to avoid jury duty? We all on the jury unless you don't show up to be in the pool. So don't opt out at this moment because we are now moving toward the confrontation and they don't have the numbers. This is a common theme. So let's look at this for a moment. I've been looking forward to this since Wednesday, since the case came. Whiteness is suicide. We're in the middle of a state level suicide. We've talked about this many times. Prof, you talked to him. I talked to him. I interviewed him for the Black Table after I read his book, Break It Up, Richard Kreitner. The theme of the United States of America has never been unity. It's been separation. This has always been coming. Remember the guy who wrote the book out of Canada about the Civil War? You talked to him. Jason Stanley, who was Jason's book, Erasing History. They always moving with these narratives. Tim Snyder on fascism. Stanley, his wife, they went to Canada. Snyder, let me get the hell out of here. This is how it happens. We saw this week at this White House Correspondents Association, the carnival. Don't even look at that. You mentioned it. We're talking with Omatosho with Dan about this. Proud Black. And by the way, commencement speakers can be good. They can be bad. I saw August Wilson give a commencement speech. It was fantastic. When I was at Howard, just before he died, I'll never forget that. What a beautiful moment. But the best commencement speech ever been given at HBCU was Dan Black's. You ain't got to have no commencement speakers. Okay. You just play black every year. You know what I'm saying? But the question of this carnival, as y'all were talking about, is a carnival. No matter, you got to parse all that. All the bots that you talked about, everybody said, build the ballroom, build the bunker, whatever, man, whatever. Y'all continue with those distractions. 400 millions, little Lynn Graham, who should never be in the United States Senate, but you can do something about that. Little Lynn don't never need to come back to the United States Senate. Y'all can do something about that, South Carolina, because there's no gerrymandering in Senate elections. That was a statewide. And gerrymandering, not only does gerrymandering not work, their second prong in trying to keep you off that jury to hold them accountable is voter suppression. That's why you got to keep checking your voter registration, keep going until we can get legislators and get a United States Senate and Congress and a president that will pass that voting rights legislation, that John Lewis Act, that will help us make sure that they can't pull none of this again. The dawn is imminent if we will get involved. I was reading Olufemi Taiwo, professor at Georgetown, did an essay on the Boston Review website this week on elites, economic, financial elites, thinking somehow they are insulated from the white lash of what's coming and that they can be protected in some kind of bunker, in a ballroom. There's no protection anywhere. If for no other reason, like I said, he just came back from the latest climate summit because the earth is going to expel us. Musk thinks he's going to be on Mars. Brother, you must be watching too many episodes of that, that Apple Plus series for all mankind. It ain't coming. Al Jazeera was reporting on what was going on at the ballroom last Saturday night before everybody else. Because I'm watching, I see social media, they just suppressed the whole algorithm on Twitter. Blue Sky got some stuff, whatever. Ain't nothing on CNN, nothing on the networks. I'm looking on the websites, New York Times. And so let me go to Al Jazeera, and they got a live feed. Why? But stop watching this commercial news, entertainment, mass media. And then Bozo shows up with Norah O'Donnell on the new Fox CBS to vomit. All that stuff is just you scattering them distractions. What you doing? I'm focusing on you. Y'all got that red cape out there, but this bull right here, this Taurus, looking at the matador. I don't need it. The only reason I talk about some of this stuff is because I know that too many people are watching it. It's important. The corporate news, entertainment, mass media is hesitant, timid, and the language is excruciating in its attempt to avoid confrontation. New York Times now, I just read it mostly for entertainment. They kind of know what's going on in some places in the world, but their language getting there is terrible. We saw Charles III. This is today's Financial Times, Royal Flush. If y'all watched it, it was very interesting, right? Talk about paternalism. Here come y'all daddy, y'all English daddy, to remind you that y'all showing y'all ass. Says here, framing the core principles of liberal democracy as a common inheritance, he was calling for another America to bestir itself. All the shade that he put in. He said, yeah, y'all was working on the east wing of the White House. Yeah, we did some renovation up there in 1814. I'm like, you know, these hillbillies don't remember the War of 1812 and how black people helped y'all burn the White House. Probably, certainly. But the whole point that he's making over and over again in there, whether he's critiquing their alleged Christian values to the exclusion of all the other spiritual traditions and to the embrace of a very narrow notion of Christianity, this from a man who comes out of the Anglicans, the Church of England, after they broke from the Catholic Church. It was all very ironic listening to Charles before the joint sessions of Congress. He slipped in a little environmentalism, and Lee Zeldin sitting there, that bozo, trying to tear up the whole damn environment. He talked about time. It's very interesting for a monarch, too many of y'all Caribbean nations still call him your Lord and Master, to talk about self-determination. But hey, he can get away with it because y'all show y'all ass. Very interesting to see that. This week, of course, the Runt Rooster up there on Capitol Hill to the Senate and the United States Representative Pete Hegseth, so comfortable with his Brill Cream slick back hair, just up there talking crazy, even as Ro Khanna and so many others are holding him rhetorically at least accountable in turn, but he don't care because who's going to check him? You get rid of him by getting different representatives in there, and you do that by checking voter registration, getting out there and doing the work. And for those of you who think it don't matter, you're not paying attention, but there's not enough of you yet to make the type of difference to distract the rest of us if we can remain focused. That's why we're here week after week after week. Bozo sends a letter to Congress saying he ain't in violation of the World Powers Act because there's a ceasefire. That's a lie. And then late last night, he says we're at war, contradicting what he wrote. They are wilding and they don't care. Meanwhile, now that we turn to the legal piece, which we won't spend a whole lot of time on, but I want to mention it in context of what we're talking about. The front page of today's New York Times has a great graphic. They do good. The graphics people, they ain't slowed down. Graphics probably the best thing about the New York Times these days. Here's the front page. What you see there, a voting rights legacy. You see it there, a voting rights legacy. It says, the number of black lawmakers in the United States House dramatically increased after the Voting Rights Act of 1965 went into effect. Here's a closer look at how the measure, which was dealt a blow on Wednesday by a Supreme Court ruling, changed black representation in southern states. And you see the black line there represents the Voting Rights Act. Before, you see the percentage of black representatives generally. You see them in the orange, the number of black U.S. representatives. Look at Reconstruction. You see that number there, 1870? That's the Robert Elliott's and the Robert Smallses and so many others, the Blanche Kelso Bruces and coming out of Mississippi. And then you see after 1900, George White is put out, the last representative out of North Carolina, and there's nobody. Then you get the Great Migration. You see Arthur Mitchell and you see the Chicago people and then Oscar the Priest and them and a few more in New York. Then they signed the Voting Rights Act and look at that explode. The purple is all other states, the northern states. The orange is the select southern states. And then they break it down. An increase in black lawmakers, the number at the state and local as well. Now on page A16, they go into more depth and they talk about how the Voting Rights Act changed the House. This is the federal government, Kathleen Chee and Emery Cochran. How the Voting Rights Act changed the House. Georgia and Texas, North Carolina and South Carolina, Louisiana and Alabama, Mississippi and Tennessee, Florida and Virginia, the South. On the same page, though, you see they didn't even wait, right? There's Meemaw, Alabama governor, calls session to draw a new map. Here's this hillbilly Marsha Blackburn, Tennessee GOP targets last Democratic seat. They are not, look. Well, anyway, they also got a ruling on abortion pills as well. Ruling blocks male access to abortion pills for now. A federal appeals court, that damn racist Fifth Circuit, can't mail those abortion pills for now. They'll send it up to rocket docket, probably let that stand, and then ultimately you can't even mail the pills to terminate a pregnancy. This is the theocracy you're living in right now. If you allow it to be, they are not in control. They're under the illusion of control. And I'm only raising all that to say that now, this is where I'm getting down to the point. You got to stop saying things like they gutted the Voting Rights Act. They gutted the voting. This is centering their will. It's a failure of imagination and a failure of memory. But fortunately, that's a remediable condition. None of the language in the Voting Rights Act has changed. None of the legislative intent in 1965 or the 1982 amendments has changed. What has changed is they've been able to put their funky judges on the court, the federal court, so they can, and now at this point, they're just saying whatever the hell they want to say. This Louisiana versus Callais, there's no legal logic behind that can sustain scrutiny. Read Elena Kagan's dissent. How do you change that? You ain't gonna change that today. Well, you check your voter registration. If you're not registered, you go out and get other people to register to vote. You can begin to change it. That next big day is in October and November. If you're not in the state where they're having a primary, that's the next day in your immediate target. Governor Landry, that bird-chested governor of Louisiana, is trying to stop the election. It's already begun taking place. East Baton Rouge Parish, they already mailing in ballots. 100,000 ballots went out, and some of them have been returned. Several thousand. So you can't stop the election. They went to court the day the man said. But what is the commercial news mass media? They stopped the election. Governor stops election. Man, they go into court. I'm not saying that they won't succeed ultimately, but if they succeed ultimately, it's going to be on a ruling that is even more absurd than Louisiana versus Callais, because people have already returned their ballots. If you allow them to get away with this, you know what you're tearing up, and I'm not sad about it, is the rule of law. But if we ever get into a fist fight, do you understand we've won every fist fight we've been in? You've never won. So the first thing we have to do is stop repeating this language that eviscerates our capacity to understand our power. This is part of a multi-generational fight against our common humanity, fueled by billionaires, shaped by a fundamental lie, by the lie of colorblindness as a protection for the rule of law. This is where I want to go to this Without Precedent book right quick. This book, Without Precedent, How Chief Justice Roberts and his accomplices rewrote the Constitution and dismantled our rights. This is very important to understand. This lady, Lisa Graves, she's on Legal AF, if you ever watched that. They connected to Midas Touch and all that. As I said, she was senior advisor in all three branches of the federal government in different roles, and she was chief counsel for nominations, Supreme Court nominations, for Patrick Leahy, who chaired the Judicial Committee at one time with Democrats in control. She starts the book with the confirmation of John Roberts. And she was like, oh no, John Roberts, have y'all lost y'all damn mind? He writes here on page 5, this corrupt and corrupting effort of billionaires basically and millionaires to control the Supreme Court is not merely an aspect of John Roberts' legacy, it is his legacy. This reactionary agenda and the means used to achieve it are, in a word, unprecedented. That's why she names the book. She goes on to say, this is page 9, she says, the Roberts Court cannot be trusted to save us from all the dictatorial impulses of Trump that Roberts and the MAGA justices on the Supreme Court have emboldened. Until he leaves the court or is removed, yeah, they got an impeachment function too. Roberts will continue to obstruct vital ethics reforms and essential repairs to the Constitution that he has so grossly distorted with the immunity edict, that's that Trump versus United States, which she ends the book with, and other deeply damaging rulings, which she goes through in great detail. But I'm reading from this because we understand that what she's writing about is how these billionaires, how these quote unquote elites, and I'm gonna get to Alito in a second before we end up with Louisiana versus Callais. They basically purchased these guys that are on the court. Now we know that in the abstract, but what I like about books like this is they go chapter and verse through the work. The Leonard Leos and the others who have come through. And then she got a whole chapter on voting. She goes through the different areas where Roberts has been particularly damaging: power, voting, class, gender, all of these things. The question of religion on a chapter called God. She goes into the question of terminating the pregnancies, abortion. All of this was dialed up by these people. And John Roberts, who cuts his eye teeth in Ronald Reagan's Justice Department, writing memos. In fact, let me go to this page. I think I marked it because I want to name some of these people that you, yes, the Federalist Society, got a whole chapter on that. We'll come back to that with Alito as well. But you got these billionaires. Here's a name that you may not have known. There's a family, Gordon Gray. It's a name you should look up. And there's another family. Here we go. Boynton. The Boynton family, very important. This Committee for Justice, launched by Clayland Boyden Gray, the former White House counsel for George H.W. Bush. He publicly went by C. Boyden Gray, but I will refer to him as Boyden below to make it easier to follow the twists ahead. He was most widely known for orchestrating the confirmation of Clarence Thomas to the court. He is tied up, like I said, Bush advanced him, but he died in 2023 at the age of 80, having helped make the Supreme Court much worse. He was one of the early white Southern Democrats to cross the line to become a Republican. So y'all stop talking about the Republicans and Democrats are the same. The White Nationalist Party is now the Republican Party. They used to be in the Democratic Party primarily, but they moved to the Republican Party and did that beginning about a century ago with the Lily White movement. But we've talked about that. Clay Kane writes about that in terms of the Republican Party. Very important. So we don't need to cover that here. He says, she says, he was one of the early white Southern Democrats to cross the line to become a Republican, joining the party of Lincoln that racist Southerners had previously disdained. His stated reason for leaving was his dislike for President Jimmy Carter's economic policies. Go back and look at the in-class where we talked about Jimmy Carter as well. Carter was a fiscal moderate and the last resistance before Ronald Reagan's reckless tax cuts, which did not actually trickle down, took hold. That made sense because Boynton was very, very rich. How rich? His grandfather's home, Grayland, was the second largest house in North Carolina, right behind billionaire George Vanderbilt's Biltmore, the Gilded Age Chateau-style mansion near Asheville. These are North Carolina cats. Goes through the family history, comes through World War II, comes up into the 1950s, the year after Brown and federal courts ordered the admission of black students to UNC and other public universities. That year, 1955, Gordon Gray left his post helming UNC, the president of the University of North Carolina. Just a father. and focused on his work at the Defense Department under Dwight D. Eisenhower. In January 1961, Eisenhower gave Gray, by then his national security advisor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That honorary medal cannot erase Gray's fuller history. While the sins of the father are not the sons, Boynton's family background informed the path of the man who helped put regressive figures like Clarence Thomas into positions of power, and others, people who have used their power to roll back the hard-won gains of the civil rights movement. Making John Roberts Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, for example, put him in a position to undermine the enforcement of the landmark Voting Rights Act. Boynton worked with billionaire Charles Koch's political advocacy group, Americans for Prosperity, and its predecessor, Citizens for a Sound Economy, to oppose indoor smoking rules. That's where you start. And others, then you start moving up the chain. Remember what this bozo who was going to speak at South Carolina State's commencement said in that little clip we saw. She against tenure. That's labor. See, and then they'll say to people, y'all working class, y'all ain't got no job protections. Why should those fathead, egghead teachers indoctrinating students? Yeah, I agree. Then you look around and find you can't organize your union because they done turned you against yourself. It starts with anti-smoking. It starts with trans bathrooms. It starts with, and then it's labor laws. Next thing you know, they have the ability to make it harder for you to go out and earn a living. And then when you protest, they say it's the N-word's fault. All these illusions can be taken away very simply by not going for the red cape. I won't go on in this. I'll just mention that this guy and his family had a lot to do with putting John Roberts on the Supreme Court. She gets into the corruption with Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society is something John Roberts, who I'll come to Alito in a second now. Roberts and Alito are tied together at the hip. We'll come back to that. Understand, though, that these billionaires can only go as far as the people who are participating in the voting process allow them once we are clear. Because they still got to go through the illusory process, the structural process of the state to accomplish what they want. They haven't quite gotten to the point where it's going to be in the mind of this addled billionaire racist out of South Carolina, Muskism. Now, we're helping them too often, unnecessarily. We could talk about that too, because I'm going to get to solutions in a minute after I talk a little bit about Louisiana versus Callais and the point that I want to make relative to that. But this cold civil war is already wielding victories. They are trying to seize the federal apparatus, but the apparatus of the state operates at the state and local level as well. Look at Wisconsin. Do you remember that silly-minded governor? What was that political inbred and stuff? Scott Walker. Remember him? That was like 50 years ago. No, it wasn't 50 years ago. He's the damn governor of Wisconsin from 2011 to 2019. That's yesterday, just before COVID. Remember when Wisconsin looked hopeless? These hillbillies had gerrymandered the Wisconsin legislature that they looked like they had a supermajority and they couldn't do anything about it, and they going to capture the Supreme Court and all this. Well, no, all that's been removed. It's been rolled back significantly. The Supreme Court is now out of white nationalist hands, and now they can go after the gerrymandering in Wisconsin and dismantle that as well. But it takes organizing and moving forward. And had a few more of us come out, Mandela Barnes would be the senator in the federal legislature from Wisconsin, and not that old feckless political ghoul Ron Johnson. That's a failure on our part, but that doesn't roll back the fact that that cold civil war has now delivered Wisconsin in the opposite trajectory of the white nationalists, of the excluders. Remember that policy wonk, the boy genius? Who in the hell? He's somewhere raking money in now as a damn lobbyist, but he ain't in the federal legislature. I'm talking about Paul Ryan. Remember him? Yeah, me neither. These things are cyclical, but they can be broken. The cycle can be broken. You see what happened in Maine. Janet Mills, the governor, they're saying, you too old. So this guy, who knows? Now the commercial news, mass entertainment media is now trying to say, well, God, this guy, Graham Plattner, is he another John Fetterman? This guy running for Senate. Like, yeah, well, he ain't Susan Collins. So if he is a sellout like Fetterman, guess what? I'd rather take him than Susan Collins. You know? But he's not. I don't think he is. But let's find out. Let's break her political back. The thesis is this. There's still a 15th Amendment. I was watching my man, Elie Mystal, this week, who's making the rounds, of course, correspondent for The Nation. He's saying the Voting Rights Act is the most important legislation in American history because it brings all of us into participation in the polity. Now, I don't agree with that. I think that once you use too much hyperbole, it all sounds the same. The Voting Rights Act is pursuant to the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and the 15th Amendment can be interpreted much more broadly than it has been interpreted. We needed the Voting Rights Act, just like we needed the 14th Amendment abutting and enabling Civil Rights Act of 1964. But theoretically, we might not have needed any of that enabling legislation, even though those constitutional amendments enable Congress to pass laws to pursue them. But that's the important moment. Understand that the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which have been whittled away by judicial interpretation by people backed by billionaires whose job is to misinterpret those laws, pursuant for some of them, like Alito, who we'll come to in a minute, by their religious zealotism, and in the case of John Roberts, by his political zealotry, particularly against voting rights, and by his inbred ego. Both of these guys, huge egos. And the last page of Revenge for the 60s, they talked to Sam Alito, who wrote something during the Reckoning season when we first started in class, when they voted to get rid of the Christopher Columbus statue in Trenton. But he was a little boy, well, teenager, when they put up the statue. So he writes something railing against this statue coming down. Well, it's still down, Sam. And then in the last page of the book, they ask him, well, you know, you from Trenton. Trenton makes the world takes. In fact, let me just read it, okay? Just so we can keep going here. This is page 257. His interviewer interrupted to recite the famous slogan on the lighted sign on the tower Lower Trenton Bridge spanning the Delaware River. Trenton makes, the world takes. Y'all know that. Some of y'all know it from Poor Righteous Teacher's video, right? Trenton. He says, the irony was painful as Alito's mind tilted backward. He could find nothing positive to say. Quote, people joke about it, but it was true. End quote, he says, quote, at one point, the city was a model for America. It really has deteriorated. Racist. You know, he ain't talking about his people. In fact, well, I'll come to Alito in a minute. But there's still a 15th Amendment. Ellie says, you know, it's the Voting Rights Act, the most important legislation in American history. If he's talking about congressional legislation that's not constitutional, I could see that case being made. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the 19th Amendment, as Valethia Watkins always reminds us, among many others, but Valethia is the clearest on as far as I am concerned. You know, black women didn't get the right to vote in the 19th Amendment. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and all them, and Alice Paul and all them. No, as Ida B. Wells reminded us then, y'all ain't really talking to us. This is a coalition politics. I'm with you, but I need you. And then once they got the right deuces in words, what the hell? Okay, let's get out here on this Edmund Pettus Bridge then. The 15th Amendment is the bedrock. The Voting Rights Act is enabling legislation. And they clearly have been after this thing. In fact, this little punk went to Princeton. He was in the last class at Princeton admitted before they started letting women in. Sonia Sotomayor, I think, was 4 years after him. And the way they treated women at Princeton in those early ones, he wants revenge for the 60s. Just Sam Alito. But they've been whittling the legislation. They can't get at the Constitution except to misinterpret it. That's what they've been doing around the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment. The equal protection due process clauses of the 14th Amendment. This is the birthright citizenship case we talked about with that punk ass Sauer up there arguing, well, I don't know. Wait a second. All of this. Now, they want to attack the amendments directly, the Constitution directly. But their initial step is to whittle away at the enabling legislation that empowers Congress to implement the meaning and plain language of those constitutional amendments. But the logic of anti-blackness requires black people to be the most loathed, least desired, and most to be avoided people in the society. So what looks like an attack on black people, which it absolutely is, in terms of these amendments, voter suppression, gerrymandering, all of that, is really an attack on everybody. But you use black people first because you've identified black people as the furthest away from our common humanity. So people, this is where the white liberals that Dr. King told us about are problematic. You ain't going far enough to protect your rights because you think it only applies to us. This is what Olufemi Taiwo was writing in Boston Review when I talked about that notion, after this fiasco at the White House Correspondents Association dinner, the whole idea that now we got to build a ballroom. Taiwo was saying, Professor Taiwo was saying, y'all do know that ballroom is not going to protect you, that the same night awaits us all. And that ultimately there are too many people who are not black who are not poor, who are not women. There are too many people who think it's not going to impact them. But what y'all can't see is that the people who it affects first are simply the point of entry for affecting everyone else. So too with voting rights. If you don't want us to build a different society, get ready to test your strength. In other words, if you're not going to build a coalition, get ready to test what you got in terms of muscle. I would never bet against Black people because we're the only ones who went through captivity like we did. And the indigenous people, I wouldn't bet against them either. They still here. We must rebuild our international alliances in this as well. What will be revealed is that we have never been committed to this abusive relationship called American. You can't make that case to me, or you can. You can absolutely make the case. I'm always open to be persuaded differently. But if you're going to make that case, you better have read more, studied more, and been more places and sat with it longer than I have. Because I'm going to have to be convinced by more than, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. Don't cut no ice with me or anyone else who has studied. You're going to have to make the case. I will tell you that this notion of American for us, defense mechanism. I will tell you that the people who are alienated, who are disengaged from the political process, are alienated and disengaged because it is also metaphorical for their relationship with America. And I'm telling you that the narrative that somehow you got to do it because it's your patriotic duty falls on the deaf ears of Black people because we ain't never been patriotic. Nobody wants to hear that. No one. It's your duty. Duty to who? You better put it on your mama, on your hood. That's as close as you can get because that governance formation is what's going to propel us to action. Them young people at South Carolina State propelled enough of us to pay attention, not because they are Americans, because they are Black. This is the foundational principle of our existence in this criminal enterprise. And if you want to gauge where our values are, look at how Black people and a lot of other people are talking about them Lego videos coming out of Iran or the knockoff Lego videos. People flocking to that. Now, if you think Brendan Carr is not somewhere losing the last 3 follicles of hair on his bald head, because this ain't Jimmy Fallon, this ain't Stephen Colbert. These are videos you can't stop and you can't regulate. And your friend Musk and your friend the Ellisons, who half of the money to purchase Paramount's purchase is coming from foreign banks, including the sovereign wealth fund of the Saudis. Ellison, he's so rich. If he's so rich, how come half the money to purchase that stuff coming from outside the country? And people watching the videos saying, yeah, ain't nobody, patriotism is not driving this. What will be revealed is we've never been committed to that, and we must now organize and drain those resources in battle. The destruction of stare decisis, the destruction of it is settled law, will reveal their whiteness and their weakness. This is important. Let me see. Sandra Day O'Connor, let me just quote what O'Connor said here, if I can find it quick. If I can't find it, I won't quote it. It's near the beginning. She says, let me see. If I can't, let me see. I won't be able to find it quickly. She was so mad. Well, I already told y'all about it, so I don't really need to quote it, but let me see. Talking about the Affordable Care Act here. Yeah. She said, I'm really disappointed in Sam. I'm disappointed in Alito. Of course you are, but you opened this door, Sandra. So let's go to the Louisiana versus Callais case and then close for the day because I'm going over time. The objective is to protect whiteness as politically cohesive. You can't draw maps based on race, is what they say. Well, they say that there are limited instances where you can, but in this case, this was a racially gerrymandered race map. But the map they're talking about, they're saying it was racially gerrymandered to discriminate against what they call non-white voters. I'm sorry, non-Black voters. What you mean non-Black voters in Louisiana? You talking about white people. You want standing for whiteness. HB1, Louisiana legislature had it. They had one majority Black district, congressional district, but Louisiana is a third Black. So they're looking over at this Milligan case, this Alabama case, and they're saying they're going to make them, we better draw a district now for the courts, make us draw a district. So they introduced the House HB 8 from the legislature. That passed, and they created 2 districts. That's where Congressman Cleo Fields is. Then the non-Blacks, the white nationalists, sued, arguing discrimination against white voters. And the Trump-appointed judges have agreed, up to and including this case. Let me be very clear about this. This is a strategy. If you lose at the legislature after you gerrymandered the legislatures, so much so that you really can't get our common humanity through the current Southern legislatures as they're currently configured, you then If you lose because they got scared in Louisiana, having looked at Alabama, move forward. If you lose, then you go to court because their reserve to try to win is the courts, is the federal bench. Let's look at the case law leading up to this moment of last week. We go back to 1982, Thornburg versus Jingles. The Thornburg versus Jingles case created the rules coming in the wake of those amendments to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And here's the rule. Thornburg asked the question, does the state have a residential segregation problem? The answer in Louisiana and most of the South is yes, because as Ketanji Brown Jackson said in the oral arguments that led up to this decision, she's saying these maps that you're talking about drawing and redrawing, they cover areas where Black people live that they've lived since they were trafficked. I'm saying they were trafficked. She said slavery. Absolutely. This Floridian who knows something about Black people not moving from where we were brought. So the first prong of the Jingles test, you got to ask yourself, in the wake of this 1982 change in the Voting Rights Act, which says you don't have to prove intent by somebody saying the N-word while they pass a law, I can look at the totality of the evidence. The first thing is, do they live in these places where there's residential segregation? The answer is yes. Then the second question is, does a state have racially polarized voting? Do they vote kind of consistent with their race? The answer is also yes. That's evidence of intent. That's that cohesiveness argument that you heard, well, part of the cohesive argument you heard in the oral arguments. So the Jingles is 1982. So guess what? You can't get them on the Voting Rights Act yet. So what are we going to do? Well, let's start changing the electorate and influencing the electorate so ultimately we can change the way people vote or suppress the vote, and then we can get politicians in and get the judges we want, and then we'll come back for a bite of the apple. Fast forward 30 years almost, 2010. When the Koch brothers and Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society, which comes into existence when Sam Alito goes to law school, goes to undergrad at Princeton, before he goes to Yale. 2010, they get Citizens United versus FEC, Federal Election Commission. Who writes the opinion? Anthony Kennedy. He ain't there no more. Anthony Kennedy says the government can suppress political speech based on corporate identity. But corporations aren't people. John Paul Stevens writes in the dissent and says corporations are not members of society and unlimited expenditures could destroy election integrity. If money is speech, how many of us got money? Money is speech. You can use as much money as you want now, thanks to John Boy Roberts put into place for a time such as this. That Citizens United case, which opens the floodgates. Let's go after the money so we can change the electorate. But guess what? Money is also in spending power. I'm telling you, keep pushing us. I love Don Staley. 10 toes down 4. But guess what? You keep effing around in South Carolina and maybe the recruits start saying, I don't want to play there. It ain't going to happen today. It ain't going to happen tomorrow. It ain't going to take but 1 or 2 to capture the imagination. But if we are doing what we're supposed to do with our young people in our communities, and we're doing this conversation and having that conversation, guess what? Ultimately, it will impact. And you keep effing with us to the point where, I'm not playing in the South, or if I'm playing in the South, I'm going to South Carolina State, or I'm going to Grambling. They're going to come after the HBCUs too, but ultimately the revenue can be impacted. I know they buy athletes. I'm not naive or stupid. But let me be crystal clear about how these things move. If past is prelude, even given the current social structure and conditions, we must understand that there is a time when people have had enough. Understand the Montgomery bus boycott. Understand what Dr. King said that first night they had the mass meeting, just left the church in Montgomery, where they had that mass meeting. Understand that when that thing shifts, it shifts all at once. And then you go back and say, what the hell? And what you realize, this glacier been shifting all along. Look at Roberts. Roberts' broad First Amendment cudgel. He's a First Amendment, you almost say like an absolutist, but he's not, because he's a racist too. They use that First Amendment cudgel to flood the zone with money. That was Citizens United. Tilt political influence toward big money donors and corporations and confuse and trick people. Look at what happened. You confuse and trick people. Look at all that propaganda by the millions that was flooded into Virginia. And this hillbilly judge out of Southwest Virginia, Tazewell County, says, well, y'all voted. Damn, they didn't. Oh, man. They voted to gerrymander Virginia to get rid of these white nationalist seats. Okay, I'm ready. Put me in, coach. Okay, judge, go. All right, no, you can't certify the election. In other words, you flooded the money in, that's Citizens United, to try to trick people. It didn't work. They had the election. Then when the election, bring the courts in off the bench. They argued, we talked to the Attorney General last week, as I said last week, and then they argued before the Supreme Court of Virginia this Monday. They allowed the judge's ruling in Tazewell County to stand. In other words, they still haven't certified the election to create those new districts, those new maps in Virginia, but it's now going to be appealed. Then they're not going to, the Virginia Supreme Court is going to rule on the underlying merits. And their claim is that this should never have been on the ballot in the first place. So it's going to be, it's setting up for a collision. Some of the judges seem kind of skeptical of whether it should have been on the ballot in the first place. But I tell you what, if they throw out all the millions of votes, if they throw out that election, if they allow them white nationalists to do that, oh, white nationalists. Whiteness is on trial here and your standing is shaky. Understand that people are not that committed. They are not that committed to your rule of law. It's very different. Start putting you on a map as the places. Don't spend your money and don't send your children to go play there and make them rich. Shelby County versus Holder 3 years later, 2013. They attacked Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, the pre-clearance clause. John Roberts said, we don't need pre-clearance because racism that made it necessary is gone. John Roberts, who started in the Justice Department, who argued against the revisions to the Voting Rights Act. John Roberts, who worked with the deep racist William Rehnquist for voter suppression. Earlier than that, John Roberts, who has spent his whole career obsessed with attacking the Voting Rights Act. And she walks chapter and verse through how he did that. He says, now that he's on the Supreme Court, he's like, the racism is gone, we don't need it, which leads Ruth Bader Ginsburg to write in her famous dissent, that's like saying that you don't need an umbrella no more because you got an umbrella outside in the rainstorm and you're dry. So since you're dry, you don't need this umbrella no more. Okay, let me oh, yeah, fool. But he's not a fool. Roberts can count. He had the numbers. That was a 5-4 decision. Let's keep going. Now, Section 5 gone, which means Section 4, which had the coverage in those southern states and some northern districts where the pre-clearance had to go, that becomes very neutralized. Now, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which allows you to say you have discriminated against me. And remember, those 1982 amendments say you have an intent standard that you can reach now because you ain't got to say the N-word. We just got to look at the map. We got to ask, are the people voting the same? Yeah. Are they in places that were segregated? Yeah. Okay. So Section 2 is still effective, but then comes the next one. Rucho versus Common Cause, 2019. North Carolina, super gerrymandered. Political gerrymandering, though, the Supreme Court says, they write, it may be incompatible with democratic principles. In other words, it may be wrong, but when they do it, we can't do anything about it because it's what they call non-justiciable. There's a non-justiciable political questions, not racial questions outside the court jurisdiction. That's a lie. But understand, that's the judge-made interpretation of the Voting Rights Act that they can't deal with political gerrymanders. They just made that up. Please understand that. But understand, that's the federal law. There are also state constitutions, the pufferfish. Andrew DeSantis, all but politically dead, trying to revive his funky career, saying we're going to gerrymander in Florida. But the Florida state constitution says you can't do it. So now they got to go to court. There are state constitutions too, y'all. We got to pay attention to this. This ain't just about, we got to stop treating politics like a winner take all, only one level game. The federal government is everybody, but in a fractured state where the cold civil war is going on, understand that every time the federal government gets to the point where they're going to impose on everybody else, there are elements that say, oh, we don't want to play. That was the Civil War. That was South Carolina. After the election, they put Abraham Lincoln in the White House. They said, oh, we see what's coming. We're leaving. Before that, in the 1850s, that was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. They're trying to keep the country together. Read Richard Kreitner's Break It Up. The federal government can only go so far in trying to impose the will of the federal apparatus on the states and the locals. States' rights becomes much more attractive to us now than it did last week because this voting right. You want to play that game? We're going to play that game. Y'all saw what happened in Virginia as they pulled together. Y'all saw getting blocked in Maryland by this hillbilly Democrat from Baltimore when they could have done the same thing in Maryland. But after this week, I think there's going to be revisiting of that. Break it up. Break it up. Let's gerrymander the hell out of the place. Then you go to 2021, Brnovich, Sam Alito writing the majority. Arizona. He's saying Arizona not counting ballots. Arizona said if you show up at a precinct and that's not the precinct which you're registered in because they done some chicanery or moved addresses or whatever, and you cast your ballot, Arizona said, we're not going to count them. And if you got an elderly aunt or somebody who lives very rural place and you say, okay, you going for the mail-in ballot? Okay, I'm going to take your ballot with me and drop mine in. Arizona said you can't do that. Well, in Brnovich 2021, Supreme Court says this is their first time, place, and manner decision. Meaning what? Elections. The states control time, place, and manner. They when they control where and how. The when, you got early voting, you got mail-in ballots, the place, the where, okay, that's the precincts. And the manner, okay, mail-in ballots, you can collect the mail-in ballots from people. No, they say, no, y'all can't collect no mail-in ballots. They're clearly engaged in voter suppression, but they say, we didn't say nothing about race. And they say, well, yeah, it is racially neutral. No, because a lot of these people are rural. You're going to hurt some white voters too, but you're really after the black ones. You're after the organizations that organize to help people. Yeah, and in that case, Brnovich, which, by the way, according to the Voting Rights Act, the 1982 amendment, you don't have to prove that somebody said the N-word or said Hispanics or whatever. You just got to show that it has this impact on these compact places where the people live and on how their politics lines up with their race. But they just decided again, no, we can't, no. The states have the ability to do that. In other words, it's all over the map conceptually. They are after an outcome. They worry about the rationale later. And of course, you get Allen versus Milligan. That's that case where they upheld Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That's the Alabama case. Roberts and Kavanaugh voted with the human beings because Callais was on the way. I think that's probably the main reason they did it. So they knew that Louisiana case was coming. So in Alabama, they didn't lose no skin. It's okay. We had it really lined up because I'm going to tell you right now, when you read Lisa Gray's book, this boy, John Roberts, his whole thing is politics. He's a liar when he talks about racial neutrality and balls of strike. That's a lie. She got him chapter and verse with the billionaires who have backed him, with the people who have raised his ascent. And then Alito, he's a purebred ideologue. Some of them same people back him, but he coming into of age with the Federalist Society, being friends with Leonard Leo and all them. She starts the book with the abortion ruling and how it leaks suddenly. She even got him down to the short hairs with his wife and Jenny Thomas. So, I mean, again, the politics is informing this. So the intent standard and white cowardice, for me, I say it with your chest. You won't because you know. If you say it with your chest, you're going to force the confrontation. So you set an imaginary standard and then repeat the BS, the law as language. We recognize immediately the racism. It's very important to understand. So these solutions, I'm going to end with this because I wanted to get more into the detail of the case, but I want to end with this because I know we've gone over and I'm going over by an hour now. So there was a shower of conference calls on Wednesday, as I said, on Wednesday night, yesterday, Thursday, from every organization you can imagine. I'm like, nah, listen, there are some basic takeaways from this case. Number one, know your enemy. It's all right to call them political enemies. Don't back up from that. Like that young lady said, I ain't talking about you personally. I'm talking about your values in mind. They're different. Know that struggle is constant. There are victories, there are losses, but what will always be there is the struggle. You got to close ranks and use every tool. Electoral politics is a constant engagement in struggle. Yes, there's a self-defense element to voting, but stop using the language of a common American polity. Stop saying the American people. No. Accept and embrace the moral and ethical reality and the purity that those young people in South Carolina State exhibited. These people chose whiteness over our common humanity and rely on us to continue to pretend that they didn't. Oh, we all come. I ain't coming. No, I'm against you because you against me. Not you personally, but you can't be allowed to do what you're doing with me. There's never been a national identity in this country. Inventory our strengths and attack their strengths. Let the weaknesses sort themselves out. Our strengths are our culture. Our strengths are our dollar. Our strengths are our numbers. Our strengths are our creativity and our brilliance. These are not smart people. They're morally compromised. They're politically evil. Samuel Alito's position is bullshit. He literally replaces, and as those other six do, replaces his opinion for the Congress in the 1982 amendments, with or without the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Look at the amendments. He literally stops and replaces. There's no legal rationale, as Kagan writes in her dissent. Stop moving. Just stop repeating the same propaganda and just keep it on an endless cycle. Entertainers and athletes ain't gonna boycott right now, but underneath the politics is the economics. We're gonna talk about that with Kwame Nkrumah this week, and for the next 10 weeks after that. Change the language. Set us back 60 years becomes restores our fighting spirit by finishing the work. So don't say, it set us back 60 years. Nah, it renewed our spirit. Because for a generation, we forgot who y'all were. Or we acted like we did. Thank you. It set us back 60 years. Who is us? It's going to set your polity back from the beginning. And that's great. It need to be level set. Remember that last scene in the first Avengers movie when they defeat the Chitauri coming out of space, and the last scene after the credits, Thanos sticks his hand in the Infinity Gauntlet and says, well, I guess I had to do it myself. That's us. I'm going to snap and get rid of all the white supremacists. But to do it, you got to get them Infinity Stones. And guess what? That means collecting all them voter registration cards and getting people to the polls. Guess I got to do it myself. Gutting the Voting Rights Act or kill the Voting Rights Act becomes clarified that our legal fight must now focus on the 15th Amendment, expanding the Supreme Court to match the judicial circuits. Restore the Voting Rights Act because they're desperate. Did they kill the 15th Amendment? This is what made the 19th Amendment, the 19th century rather, John Henry Clark's favorite century. He liked the 15th and 19th Amendment. He said, we fought in the 19th Amendment. We fought in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. It ain't been that long ago. There's a reason why, Prof, you said the 1970s is your favorite decade. That was a fighting decade too. What we're studying now, Nubia with the second emancipation, very important. Step one, win the Senate. We got to win the Senate, y'all. We got to get people in there who are going to vote differently. We got a chance to do that in a few months. Number two, well, step 1A, win the House of Representatives. This may be our last chance in a while to do that. Step 2 is to win the presidency in 2028. Seems like it's impossible. It ain't impossible. Step 3, fighting that cold civil war at the state level. That's governors, that's senators, and that is attorneys general like Tish James in New York. The inevitable fracture has always been here. To organize, you got to do that. Understand that I was reading an article this morning's New York Times on this guy named Delan Pevsky in, of all places, Bulgaria. He got a stranglehold on the Bulgarian government, but them people rose up and elected a different government, and now he could go to jail. You see, all the boys' friends in Hungary, Viktor Orban, are fleeing the country. Some of them, I was reading, moving to Dubai. All the snakes are coming out. Once the people, here's the article on Bulgaria. A puppet master no election seems able to remove. That headline's misleading. When you read the article, this guy right here, all his friends are leaving. He's desperate now, and all the corruption's coming out. That's what's going to happen to Bozo and his friends. This is a slim thing. I didn't even mention the case that put Roberts and them boys on the map. Ultimately, that goes back to the year 2000, Bush versus Gore, when O'Connor, was so worried about Alito, you're the one voted to allow George Bush to steal the election of 2020 by stopping counting the votes in Florida, which I thought the states, in terms of time, place, and matter, were in charge of. That illegal, that unconstitutional ruling in Bush versus Gore set all this in motion. And guess what? Guess what? From 1965 Voting Rights Act to the year 2000, that's 35 years, right? From 2000 to today is 26 years. Guess what? These increments, we need to stop thinking about them as, oh, doom and gloom, goodness, roll us back. No, these things change with the politics of the moment when we get involved. This is where I'm going to end. This is from the end, the epilogue of the John Roberts book, Without Precedent. This is what she says here. This is what Lisa Graves says. Here are the reforms that need to be put in place. Senator Chuck Schumer's No Kings, and forget Chuck Schumer. The No Kings Act would make clear that presidents are not immune from criminal prosecution. Then they go into court and they're going to try to bring it to the Supreme Court. That's why all these things got to take place at the same time. So you got to reverse Trump versus United States. Next, the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act would restore key enforcement provisions, the pre-clearance rules that Congress adopted in 2006 and that John Roberts dismantled. I didn't even talk about that. Number 3, the Freedom to Vote Act, previously called Senate Bill 1, would bar extreme partisan gerrymandering and reverse the rulings in Rucho versus Common Cause and his progeny. Do you see the pattern there? Supreme Court, this ain't what they meant. Okay, fine. Now, put it back. Y'all gonna try to litigate again, but between then and now, We're going to get these people registered to vote. We're going to break your back. And it's not a national thing in terms of this national identity. It's a state by state, precinct by precinct civil war. Stop using the language that has held us back over these 2 generations. Fannie Lou Hamer wasn't using it. Why would you? Next, the Citizens United case must be overturned, and the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act's rules on ads near Election Day should be restored. There are a number of proposals to accomplish this, and she talks about how to do this. Next, the tax code obviously needs to be reformed to make sure billionaires pay their fair share, which should be at least 35% of revenue or more. That's going to be a little bit tougher because it's going to take a little bit more time, but the other things will lay the foundation for that. Meanwhile, Zoran Mamdani said, give my people they jewel back, Charles. The federal right to access abortion and contraception should be adopted. The Comstock Act, which Project 2025 suggested using to block the mailing of miprostone, should be repealed. We also need measures to underscore the Environmental Protection Agency can regulate carbon, along with bills to restore Chevron defenses. That Chevron case I didn't even talk about. I've talked about it before. In other words, you're doing this through federal legislation. And then finally, she says, many other Roberts Court's rulings need to be overturned or mitigated, including the decision where John Roberts hubristically blocked student debt forgiveness, the devastating Janus ruling that undermines labor unions, and the ridiculous decision that recast bribery as a form of accepting gratuities. Remember that? He even talked about gun control. She got a whole chapter in here on Bruin, the New York case, right? You got to have term limits. You can do that. Expand the court. I already said that. Ethics, reinforcement, and limiting gifts. Sorry, Clarence Thomas. And we could go on, but I'm going to stop there because we are way past time and we covered a lot today. I didn't get really into the guts of the voting rights case, but I think the broader context was more important than to do that, realizing that we didn't get a chance to do that today. And we'll see between now and next Saturday whether we need to go into the guts a little bit more, depending on how people are thinking about it. So
We're not going anywhere.
Oh no, we could come do it next week, I guess. But I mean, but since those young people, see, we didn't even have, isn't that interesting, Prof? We probably would have covered the detail, but those young people inserted themselves. This is the thing. You know what I'm saying? We didn't even know about that. This time last week, we didn't even, which I'm embarrassed to say. They picked her before Saturday. Those young people said, no, now y'all gonna focus on this. Did you see, you went to see Michael?
I still haven't. And there's an echo. Back. I don't know why.
Hold up. You know, it always comes at the end.
Yeah.
There we go.
Let's see. Yep. Okay, that fixed it. You know, I bought tickets twice and didn't go because the weather was nice. But every time I'm not compelled to go because I lived Michael Jackson, and I never, excoriated him. I never put him in a category of somebody to be demonized. I still play his music. I have all of his albums. I just bought some vinyl. Yeah.
It's interesting. How do you read this, right? Like, because we know Whitney Houston, we know Luther Vandross, we know Queen. As with Michael Jackson, he's #1 again. How much money can they make?
No, but there's a vibration. There's a vibration with Michael Jackson that even to this day, little children they feel it.
Sure.
They feel it. Now I'm seeing all the people dressing up and showing up, and that's the thing that art has to do. And that man was intentional about his care for the planet, for children, for humanity. And people tried to twist it around, but he's donated so much money to folk that didn't have, and was very, even in the videos, Africa, we ain't even going to talk about the Nation of Islam and his connection there. There's so much that Michael Jackson was, and they tried to make him into a buffoon or avatar or somebody that didn't want to be black. But we lived it. So was there a revelation when you went to see it? Was there something in the movie that you were like, oh my God, I didn't know that?
Not a single thing. In fact, obviously I don't know Antoine Fuqua or any of the, and then reading about it, you've probably read more about it than I have, but the battles with the lawyers, clearly this was a script, however it emerged, that by the time it made it to the screen, had been touched by every damn lawyer in the world. I just feel Joe Jackson, man. I'm like, y'all could have trashed him worse than he did, but the script is so flat and stereotypical but to the point you're raising, you can't mess up the music. So it's like you can just go and ignore it, just like that Luther. Just go listen to the music. I mean, and so what they did do, I will say this though, Jafar Jackson, boy, he was his uncle. I mean, so you can't, like, those kind of things in them moments, you know, it's like, that's crazy. Just sitting there looking at, I mean, if don't even worry about the script. I mean, whatever. Just watch him walk around and then do the dance. And I'm like, oh, you could go on tour with your uncles. I mean, it's like, so that was, you know, it's, you know, light fare.
DNA don't lie, right?
DNA don't lie.
Which is why we know them children aren't them children, which is why we know.
No question.
Them children aren't them children. We know that.
Question. That we know that for sure. So anyway, at some point, but I'm looking forward to August Wilson. We're gonna say less. We'll talk about that.
We'll say less.
We're gonna say less.
Thank you for this. And ultimately the overarching message is make sure you're registered to vote, because none of those things that you talked about, none of it gets overturned. The courts don't get packed. None of that happens if you're not electing people who are going to do that. So we have to make sure we're registered, and then also demand, because what we see these young people, when you show up and you pressure and you demand and you say what you're not going to do, power has to bend. It doesn't give it up without a fight. So if you're not willing to fight, then sit down. And being on the internet is not fighting. Yelling into the void is not fighting.
It's not fighting. Don't listen to them people anyway. You're absolutely right. That was a victory this week.
Yes, sir.
So everybody who's graduating this coming Saturday, there they go. So everybody who's graduating, y'all, congratulations. See, next week is Harris graduation. And also on Monday night in Nubia, remember, we're doing the preface, we're doing the acknowledgments, and we're doing the introduction to the second emancipation. So we're starting with that on Monday night. So love you. You're gonna hear them one more time. You're gonna play them.
Yeah. I'll see you later.
Yeah. See you later.
All right.
Well, honestly, she just doesn't align with our values here at South Carolina State University. She speaks against DEI, which every HBCU, honestly, every school benefits from.
Student government leaders and seniors saying their concerns focus on whether the speaker reflects the values of the university community.
We are basically here to talk based on our morals at a university, a historically black institution, how we feel as students that we have worked so hard over the past 4 years to do what we have to do to be graduates, to be students that are willing to go out in the world and accept what we're given and fight for what we want. So we're not against the lieutenant governor at all as a person. We are more on the fact that commencement is sacred, and we want somebody here that's willing to uplift us as students.
Students say commencement should be about a moment that reflects their experience and their future. During a press conference Wednesday morning, Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette says she was invited months ago and plans to deliver a positive message.
The college called and asked if I would be their commencement speaker, and was happy to do that. I'm always happy to share a positive message on just what an amazing state we live in, what an amazing country we are in, and just that everybody's potential is unlimited. If you're willing to work hard for your dreams, they can come true.
She also called to end diversity, equity, and inclusion, but she also pushed back on criticism, pointing to what she calls a broader issue on college campuses.
We have to get rid of DEI on college campuses. We've got to get rid of indoctrination by professors on college campuses by ending tenure.
Students and alumni here say their goal is simple: to be heard by university leaders.
The purpose of today was to truly get Conyers to come address us how we deserve to be addressed. How we were addressed yesterday was not enough.
Forget political parties. The thing that matters most is the student body and the graduating class. They do not want her to speak, period. I don't understand what